If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who live in the woods, hike, camp, or explore the outdoors, what are your scariest encounters deep in the forest with the supernatural, strange phenomena, otherworldly creatures, paranormal beings, or anything similar?
Weird happenings in the woods of Connecticut, circa 2007. I was just talking to my wife about an experience I had years and years ago in the backwoods of Connecticut. She suggested that I share it here to see what you all think. I was spending time on the back porch and driveway with my friend at the time. He was on the porch smoking a cigarette, while I stood in the driveway with keys in my hand. We stood there chatting for half an hour, as we always did before I left for the night. It was around 2 to 3 a.m., and behind his house is several miles of forest. This area is the Chaplin/Hampton/Scotland area, so as not to dox anyone. From off in the woods, we heard what sounded like a massive group of people, dozens, scream laughing at the funniest joke they'd ever heard. My first thought was, wow, someone's having one hell of a party in the woods and just told one banger of a joke. But the laughter continued. Imagine a group of people laughing to the point of insanity, breathless and screaming with laughter, dozens of individuals all doing this continuously for at least a minute. It sounded far off in the woods, so we exchanged worried glances in the direction of the dark forest. We were standing talking about how unsettling the noise was when it rocketed from what sounded like miles away to right up outside the edge of the visible light from the spotlight on the side of his house. It got very, very loud for a few seconds and then zoomed silently, as in, no other noises. We heard footsteps, branches snapping, and other sounds in a different direction until the noise faded into the distance. We tried searching online way back when, but all we found were people insisting it must have been coyotes, fisher cats, foxes, etc. I've lived in New England my whole life. I grew up hearing about fishers, cats, coyotes, and other similar animals. Let me tell you, the creature was not an animal, and it moved unsettlingly fast. It sounded like human laughter, but it was unlike any laughter I had ever heard before. Laughter like it hurt. Pale creature? When I was 15, I moved to West Virginia with my mom and brother from Ohio. Moved to Huntington, West Virginia. There were kind of big woods nearby, though. My brother and I decided to get some Four Loko and walk around. I brought a couple of joints. We had 3 Four Lokos, 3 for me and 1 for him. He didn't want to drink much. We're walking near the park, which has a woods trail. It goes from the city park to the woods. We were walking up to the park, we were almost there, and we had to walk straight for a quarter mile. We both looked to our left in the open square where a house hadn't been built near the park. This pale, lanky, skinny thing was on all fours, facing away from us. My little brother got terrified. He was also about 13 at this time. He looks at me scared and says, "Sissy, what is that?" He still calls me that. I still call him Bub. It's a family thing. We don't call each other first names. I shrugged my shoulders like I didn't care but was still standing still, staring at it. Not even an acre away. I don't know the actual measurements, but it was close enough to see some details but far enough to be able to watch. Anyways, I shrugged my shoulder like I didn't care, and I didn't answer verbally, trying to be quiet. I didn't mean to scare him, but I was scared myself. I wanted to keep everything calm. Being his older sister for years, I was good at that. It then jerked its head back as if you were to look behind you. It made eye contact with me. I didn't see too much of a nose. It had a mouth, not pink lips like I would have. Its eyes are hard to describe but dark. As if you were looking at someone who isn't all there. Small. It screamed while making eye contact, its body still facing away. I didn't do anything. I stayed still and kept eye contact. I knew I couldn't die, I didn't want to. My little brother was right next to me, nothing could happen to him. I didn't move. I was going to do what it took. If my brother and I had to fight it to live, that would have been what had to happen. But instead it screamed at us and ran away. Its scream was weird, I'd never heard anything like it before. I didn't walk to the park and continue drinking. I walked past the park in every lit up area calmly till we got home. My brother was terrified. We barely talked the whole way home. We didn't talk about the encounter until we got in the house with the door shut in my room. I tried to convince myself that it might have been a deformed person on drugs. We believed that explanation for about a month, but we no longer think it was true. I don't know what it was. It was bald, pale, and lanky, fit to move on all fours. It was just so weird. My brother ended up saying that when I acted like I didn't care, it helped him a lot in the situation. I wonder what would have happened if we had run. Can anyone seriously explain this? I'm genuinely wondering and wanting help. This was 3 years ago now. Sometimes, it still keeps me up at night thinking about it. My brother and I continue to talk about it. I have mentioned it to individuals in person. The majority respond by saying, "That's frightening," and then proceed to share a ghost story. They claim to believe me, but I remain uncertain about whether I genuinely believe them. I've tried searching the Department of Justice files and other sources using relevant keywords, but I can't find anything. But I simply don't know what this would be called besides pale creature. Please help. I grew up in East Tennessee. Weird stuff happens sometimes. Our old farmhouse was haunted. Try to find an old farmhouse that isn't. I've seen floating balls of light in the woods. Witch lights, my grandma would call them. I don't know what they are, but I know better than to follow them. My mother once told me she saw a Bigfoot. She didn't call it that, though. She'd never heard of it before. She said she was walking down the road by our place, looked up and saw a very tall creature like a man, covered in black fur or hair, standing at the tree line. He stared at her for a second and then turned and walked back into the woods. The encounter was when she was a teenager, so around 1943. Turned out, a lot of the men in town had seen this thing when they were out farming or hunting. They saw it so often they named it Old Blackie. Not very imaginative, folks. Nobody was fussed about it, it was just there. Nobody bothered the creature, and it didn't bother the people. Eventually it went away, or maybe died. By the time I was living there, it was long gone. It was my grandfather who told me the farmers had seen it, though he never did. Neither my mum nor my grandfather ever made up stories or told tall tales. So I kinda have to believe in Bigfoot now. Encounter with an unknown forest entity. This encounter happened on the 25th of May in 2026 in eastern Norway. I'm 20 years old. I was walking through the forest alone, close to where I live. I heard a bunch of weird noises that I couldn't really make sense of. I don't even know how to explain them. I've never heard anything like it. But as I was walking I got to a clearing and decided to walk through it and into the forest on the other side. I say clearing, but it was quite dense with vegetation. It was a clearing in the sense that there were no trees there, just a lot of bushes and stuff. Not the easiest to walk through, but as I made it a little over halfway through the bushes, there was an actual clearing. With only grass, like a little circle. And there was this weird white stuff on some of the grass there. There were also a few cut tree stumps there, probably from when they chopped down all the trees in this clearing. I walked through the rest of the bush and made it back into the forest. I kept walking for a minute and suddenly felt something. As I turned to the right, I saw what looked like the head of a moose about 50 meters away. I fully stopped, and as I stood there, I was looking at it, trying to see if it was a moose or just some vegetation in the shape of a moose head. And after just a couple of seconds, it moved up a bit to get eye contact with me. It was definitely an animal. But it seemed too big, way too big. A moose's head is typically around 60 to 65 centimeters long. But this one was well over a meter. I've never seen anything like it. It just sat there, staring at me, while I stood there, staring at it. I lost the staring contest, however, and I turned around and left the forest. It felt like I wasn't welcome there. It felt as if what I saw was the ruler of the forest. This made me think of the movie The Ritual, which is one of my favorite films. Maybe what I saw was some kind of forest god. I'm not saying it is a forest god, but I'm also not ruling out that possibility. Please let me know if you have any other theories. I would love to know what you think. Or if you have had a similar encounter. I will also note that I only ever saw the creature's head, as it was presumably lying down behind a hill with only the head poking up. It did not have any antlers, which made me feel like it was female. Also, when I lost the staring contest and turned around to leave, it didn't take more than 2 steps for me to not be able to see it anymore. I could only see it from exactly where I was standing. Not at all visible from any other angle on the path I walked. My girlfriend and I had an odd experience in the forest. We still can't shake the feeling. This story takes place not even 24 hours ago when my girlfriend and I decided to take a short walk in her town's forest preserve as we finally started getting warmer weather. The trail starts off on a barren, hilly field that overlooks only a handful of houses a few yards away. When we started walking, the sun was beginning to set, the sky was painted in pastel pinks and blues that were slowly fading into a dark, deep blue. It was beautiful to see while walking in the plains, but as soon as we walked into the forest, the comfort and safety of the childlike colors were covered by a canopy of trees that had barely started growing leaves. The trail immediately went from an open field into the forest. The trees were sharp, standing straight up. No imperfections in the trunks, no overgrown roots reaching to grab up from the ground, no branches threatening to smack us in the face. As we continued on the trail, just walking and talking as girls do best. All of a sudden both of our eyes darted to the ground as my girlfriend stopped in her tracks, letting out a small noise of disgust and confusion. As we examined the mysterious lump on the ground, we realized how eerie it truly was. Lying in front of our feet was a dead squirrel, which wouldn't seem as abnormal, but the squirrel didn't look just dead, it looked like the life was sucked out of it. The squirrel was in a shriveled up position, sharp, fang-like teeth still in its mouth, as well as its sunken eyes. The squirrel was entirely black, every inch of it. Not a hint of variation or discoloration, no lighter tones tucked into the folds of its limbs. Its body showed no signs of decay, just a uniform, unnatural blackness. The body had no bugs flying around, despite me constantly getting bit by them throughout the walk. It had no odor, no smell of death lingered near it. We couldn't understand how an animal could lose its life so entirely without another creature coming to claim it as food. In the middle of the woods, in spring, it felt unnatural, no predator stepping in to carry on the cycle of life. My girlfriend said from the top of her head to the bottom of her toes, she felt a hot vibration flow through every nerve ending in her body. At the same time, I felt a deep pressure that caused every joint in my body to tense up as well as my chest getting so tight I started to believe someone had punched me the day before. Without hesitation, we decided to turn around, as we are very into trusting our intuition. As we made our journey back to the car, we were barely a mile out into the trail. My girlfriend turns to me and asks me if I heard that. I shut my trap and listen, only hearing the leftover echoes of what I heard. She said she could barely make it out but sounded like a woman screaming "Help me." We waited a beat before continuing our walk. Trying to beat the now quickly setting sun, we walked in silence, focused on getting the duck out. Both of our bad feelings are increasing with every step we take. I began to hear the screams myself, but they were sounding further and further away. I found this odd because the distance between where my girlfriend initially heard the screams and our current location suggested that the person screaming would have had to quickly jump in a car and drive another mile or so away from us. This explained how rapidly the screams became more distant. As I thought about it, I had a realization that made my stomach drop. I told my girlfriend that we just needed to get out and we needed to get out now as the screams continued and got further. We exited the forest just as the green flash of the sun appeared and the screams just came to stop. I explained to my girlfriend a Filipino urban legend I grew up with regarding a specific type of aswang. Manananggal, or tik-tik, is a demon creature that in the daylight will disguise itself as a human, dog, cat, or any normal creature you see in your day-to-day, but when it becomes dusk, it turns into a soul-sucking vampire. And what it's most infamous for is the further it sounds, the closer it is. Once when I was a kid, I went for a walk in woods I commonly frequented. I hadn't gone back for a while because one time my boyfriend at the time and I were about to enter the woods, but we decided not to because we heard what sounded like several howls. I'm talking probably at least 7 or 8. The sounds grew, and we were like, nope. Peace out. This wooded area was off of a well-resided area, but there is a path that takes you to almost like a hidden woods and farm area. It's so strange because now that I think about it, I was so close to many homes but never could find sight of them in these woods. There's even a huge wide open field that leads to more wooded paths ahead. Like a huge break dividing woods. I loved and missed going to the woods, and I went there after like maybe a good few weeks. As I walked, it had rained not long ago, and the mud was fairly mushable. I saw the most enormous tracks I have ever seen in my life. The dog-like claw prints were bigger than my foot. How big are wolf prints? Anyways, I kept walking. The sun was out, it was a nice day. I started down the wooded path, and I sort of felt off. Anxious. Kept trying to throw away the feeling. The woods have always been my sanctuary and safe place. I always felt the most at home in the woods. I picked up a large stone in case I had to scare a possible threat off. I felt like everything would be fine when I saw the sun in the open break that separated the two woods. I got to the clearing and walked to the middle when the loudest and scariest, deepest growl I ever heard seemed to emanate from the woods. It felt as if the entire forest was closing in on me. I really tried very, very hard to discern the location. I'm quite good at things like that. It truly emanated from everywhere. I was frozen in fear, and that was the first time in my life I knew what it felt like to be paralyzed by fear. I set the rock down knowing that Pebble wouldn't do jack shit in a throwdown with this boss, so I figured I would set it down. I literally said out loud something like, "I'm sorry, I don't mean any harm. I know now I'm not welcome in these woods. Please let me leave." I got the courage to take a deep breath, and I felt like I could go, but never went back ever again. Honestly, I don't feel the same way about the woods anymore after that. Backpacking with a buddy, we night hiked in the dark for the first few miles into the wilderness and then set up camp. We both missed that the campsite was just 40 yards or so from an old logging road. In the dead of night, an old F-250 truck came rumbling down the road with its high beams on, struggling and backfiring, Just as we were waking up and opening the tent, the truck stalled, letting out a big engine sigh while its headlights shone on our tent. Couldn't have been more than 2 minutes before we got out of the tent, started shouting at the truck to see if they needed help, and walked on over to it, but as we got close enough, we realized no one was in or driving the truck. It was the biggest heart-dropping, oh shit, moment of my life. We kind of just shouted into the darkness as we walked up the logging road for a bit, but after not finding a trace of anyone, we decided to just pack up and get the duck out of there. Walked back out to our car and canceled the rest of the backpacking trip. The story that made me believe in the paranormal. Hello. I would like to share a story that has been troubling me for nearly a decade. To this day, I still can't properly explain what exactly we saw back then. When I was 11 years old, I went to visit my grandmother in a village in western Ukraine. My grandmother had her own garden and flower beds, and she loved flowers very much. It was early spring then, the season of snowdrops, and she asked me to go to the forest and pick some flowers for her. My older sister went with me, she was 19 years old at that time. To get to the forest, we had to walk across a huge field that went steeply uphill. At the top, you could already see the forest. Before the field, we passed several residential houses standing almost separately from the rest of the village and then an old abandoned military base. After it, the climb to the forest began. The base itself looked creepy, half-destroyed buildings, concrete, rust, and absolute silence all around. We climbed around there a bit, messed around, and then went further into the forest for snowdrops. But there was something else strange. Right in the middle of that slope there was a hill, almost sticking out from the hillside. And in the center of the hill grew 3 huge oak trees, positioned in an almost perfect triangle. Even back then, that place gave off some unpleasant feeling. We picked a full basket of snowdrops and were already heading back. We were walking down through the field, and I noticed that everywhere on the ground there were little clumps of hay or straw lying around. Like a kid, I started stepping on them just for fun. My sister immediately said, "Don't step on them, or you might wake something up." I didn't really pay attention to it. We walked a little further downhill, and suddenly I got a very strange feeling, like someone was watching us from behind. I don't know why, but I suddenly really wanted to turn around. I turned back toward the hill with the 3 oak trees. And then I saw it. Right between the trees, there was a figure floating. Floating, not standing. It looked like a woman in a long white dress. Long black hair completely covered her face. At that moment, it reminded me of the girl from The Ring. The creepiest part was that she didn't seem to touch the ground. She was just hanging in the air. At first I froze and blinked several times, thinking I was imagining it. But the figure didn't disappear. Then, without taking my eyes off it, I suddenly grabbed my sister and told her to look there. I will never forget her face at that moment. Her eyes became huge, her pupils widened, I couldn't even tell whether it was more shock or animal fear. I was holding her hand, and her hand started shaking. She whispered, "Run." After that, we just took off running downhill across the field like crazy. While running, I turned around one more time to check if the figure was following us, but there was nothing there. From the moment we started running, only a few seconds had passed, the figure had simply disappeared. We stopped only about a kilometer later. While running, we lost almost all the flowers. When we told our grandmother what had happened, she replied that during World War II, near those 3 oak trees, the Germans allegedly ended Jews and Ukrainians. The strangest thing is that years later I started hearing very similar stories from other people. One of my female friends told me that while staying with her parents at a country house near a forest, she went out onto the balcony at night and saw in the distance the exact same silhouette, a woman with long hair and white clothes, who seemed not to walk but to float through the trees deeper into the forest. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Some people believe she is a banshee, while others think she is a witch, a restless soul, or some form of unclean energy. But that feeling of terror and the atmosphere of that place stayed with me for the rest of my life. Maybe someone has experienced something similar? I don't believe in the supernatural, but I still get scared by rustling sounds when I sleep alone in the woods. It's just critters or the wind. There's nothing around here that's likely to cause me harm. But there is a woods around here that just has an odd, slow, lonely vibe. It's probably all in my head, or maybe there's like some kind of weird stone off-gassing something that messes with your head a little bit, or maybe it's ghosts, I don't know. Every once in a while, I go for a little hike, and I feel much more isolated and distant from civilization than I actually am, yet I still sense that I am being watched and experience a strange, sad unease. I never get this feeling anywhere else, and it's a pretty small woods where you can often see a pretty busy road and some homes from it. There is some violent history in these woods, There was a battle between native Indians and an English garrison here in the 17th century where the natives basically besieged a group of soldiers for days and tried to burn and smoke them out but ultimately suffered too many casualties and fled. A couple of stone basements from those garrisons still remain. There's also an old colonial overgrown road where people in stagecoaches used to get mugged by thugs. This was also farming and grazing land, and there are old stone walls lining ancient property lines from when the area was basically deforested to make way for merino sheep in like the 19th century. And I'm sure a lot of people and animals lived and died here over the years. I don't know, some days it's nice and pleasant. Some days, it feels as if you are in a bizarre dark wood, far away from any signs of life, where unseen entities watch and whisper, and time seems to slow down. It's weird. In the fall of 1986, it was mid-October, and I was 26 years old in northeastern Ohio, on the county line road between Lake and Ashtabula counties. The time was approximately 3 a.m. I was on a Honda 650cc motorcycle going home after bartending at the Swiss Chalet in Geneva on the lake. About 100 yards ahead of me, I clearly saw a tall, broad, hairy, upright man-like creature cross the road from east to west. I slowed down as I approached the area, which was heavily wooded and extremely overgrown. There were deep ditches on each side of the road. I was in second gear, going about 25 miles per hour, as I passed the spot and saw the creature standing in the ditch, looking directly at me. We were only about 6 feet apart. Its face was a combination of ape-like and Neanderthal and very human-like. It has a heavy brow ridge over dark eyes, a wide flat nose, and a very wide mouth and square teeth. It was smiling at me. This scared the living shit out of me, so I looked away and focused on controlling the bike while gunning the throttle. I looked back a couple of seconds later, and the creature was still running after me, smiling. I drove as fast as I could for the next couple miles, feeling that it was still behind me, but I never looked. Unfortunately, I only lived about 5 miles from that spot, even less as the crow flies. My family owned 175 acres of mixed farmland and forested space north of the Grand River. It should not be difficult to pinpoint exactly where my encounter was. I no longer have any attachments to the area, and it has since been built upon. I only wonder if the creature is still up there. The encounter changed my life. I didn't ride my motorcycle around there anymore. I avoided that road for almost a year. I began carrying a .357 Magnum around when I was outside the house and working outside. I never camped out again until after I had moved to another state. I didn't tell anyone until I was married 4 years later. My wife actually had an experience in Deep Creek, Maryland, in the 1970s. The event was life-changing, and I almost wish it had never happened because even now the subject is so controversial and taboo. I saw a strange creature when I was a kid in Bavaria. I found this community by chance and want to tell you my story. It all happened in August 2016. I was 15 and my brother was 14. We grew up in rural Bavaria in Germany, and our father had been excited for days because the planet Mars was supposed to be clearly visible in the night sky. And so it was. We admired Mars shortly after sunset. Our house stood at the edge of a forest, and I wanted to be cool, so I went with my brother to walk through the forest at night, about half a kilometer away from the house. We did that, and on the way back we came out of the woods again and only had to walk up a steep hill to get back onto our parents' property. There, in the darkness, a muscular, naked man came towards us. At first I thought he was naked because he had the same color and texture everywhere, no contrast like clothing. He walked past us quickly, but he wasn't running. He seemed gigantic to me, probably around 2 meters tall. I swear, he looked like he was wrapped in gray-white, light gray cloths, like cleaning rags. And when I said hello, because I didn't know what else to do, I finally realized what was wrong with his face. He didn't really have a face, instead, it was tightly wrapped in those cloths. And his head was enormous and not human, but like a mix between a pony's and a German shepherd's, this grotesque, elongated shape. He didn't do anything at all, just kept walking. He seemed extremely old to me. I couldn't say another word, and my brother asked me, once we were back at the house, if I had seen that too. A few years later, now in our mid-20s, I asked him about it again. He confirmed the story once more. To this day I don't know what that was. If someone had wanted to play a prank on us, they would have had the perfect chance to chase us across the entire meadow. Strangely, we were both shaken at the time, but we weren't actually afraid of him. He radiated authority and something ancient, as if he had existed long before humanity. Like a nature god? There are several legends about mythical creatures in our area, but nothing that even remotely fits this. Potential Wendigo encounter. I'm mainly writing this because I don't know a whole lot about creatures that may or may not exist. I've always believed in ghosts and demonic entities, but I've never considered any other supernatural creature's existence before, until now. For context, my girlfriend practices witchcraft and is highly attuned to spirits, something I've never questioned, having had a few weird spiritual encounters myself. However, last night we had an encounter that left me a bit shaken and unsure of my feelings/safety. We were driving through a forest a few kilometers from her residence around midnight, simply for enjoyment. At one point on a dirt road, we came across another car, and I had to drive slightly off the dirt road with two wheels to get by it. As that happened, she got a feeling we were being watched. She told me to slow down because she felt that something was watching us and that an animal might jump in front of the car. I trusted her and did as she requested. We spent some time getting out of the forest, and the whole time we were both on edge, her saying she still had that feeling. We eventually turned off the dirt road and onto pavement, and that's when she said she saw it. She said she saw a shadow when driving past, and as we passed it, she looked back and, in my brake lights, said she saw a tall dark humanoid creature with long sharp fingers and some other descriptors I can't remember. We are both big fans of horror and paranormal shows, so we know our stuff about supernatural creatures. She turned to me and said, "Don't say it, but do you know what I think that was?" My immediate thought was that she was referring to skinwalkers, but later she clarified by saying the one that starts with W, and I understood what she meant without needing to say it. We kept driving as fast as the speed limit would allow, and she said she could feel its presence still. All I felt was an uneasy feeling. We continued down the paved road through the forest, knowing civilization wasn't far away, but she claimed it was still chasing us and that she didn't think it liked that we had left the road. After some time of remaining on edge and eventually reaching a more developed area, the uneasy feeling subsided. We drove around a bit more in the lit suburban areas and forgot about it. Tonight, back at my house, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me. Is this most likely just some coincidence, and did she just think she saw something? Is this feeling I have real or just lasting from last night, and is there anything I can do to help with it? Oh, I have a story for this. I'd like to caveat first by saying this is 100% true, and it still gives me goosebumps. A few years ago I went on a solo backpacking trip in June in the eastern US. I only planned to hike up a trail, camp one night, and hike back down the next day. I got to the turnaround point around 5 and set up camp. My tent was a small, one-man tent that was basically a rectangular bivy bag with 2 tent poles to raise it off your face, Snugpack Stratosphere if you want to look it up. Approximately 5 meters away, I constructed a fire ring, ignited a fire, arranged a chair, and consumed a mountain house meal. While the sun set, I poured my glass of scotch and started reading a book. Just before the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a huge crash in the woods. Here, I'd like to point out I am a well-experienced backpacker and have spent many nights alone in the woods. Trees falling or big animals stomping through the woods is a common sound. That is not what this was. It sounded like someone crashed a truck into a tree or something. Regardless, I didn't think too much of it, though I did get up to investigate and make sure I didn't attract any bears or big cats with my meal. Finding nothing, I returned to my camp and sat down. The last thing I remember was my ass hitting the chair. The next thing I know, I suddenly open my eyes, and it is pitch dark. My fire is nothing but coals, my half-drunk cup of scotch is nearly placed on a rock near the fire, and I am sitting in my chair with my arms crossed and my book neatly laid over my chest, closed. I check my watch, and it's 0300 on the dot. I can't find my headlamp, lighter, or phone, so I get up and use my watch's backlight to go to my tent. When I find it, the stakes at the feet side of the tent have been violently ripped out of the ground, causing grapefruit-sized craters. My tent has also been rolled up onto itself and is resting on the bedside in a pile. I unroll and unzip the tent to find my phone and headlamp stuffed into the foot of my sleeping bag. I know that I had my headlamp around my neck and was actively texting my wife on my phone before I heard the crash. I even used my headlamp to look into more shaded spots in the trees. When I get my headlamp out and on, I immediately investigate the area and find that absolutely nothing else has been disturbed. I didn't sleep that night. I lit the biggest fire I could, turned my phone flashlight on and kept it face up shining into the sky, and kept my headlamp on and on my head. I was absolutely ducking terrified. I hiked out at first light and drove straight home. To this day I have no idea what happened. But, even typing this, I can feel that feeling of abject terror. I have experienced combat, have feared for my life many times, and have never, ever felt the kind of fear I felt that night. Not my story, but it comes from a long trusted friend. He grew up in the woods of Kentucky. He said one day he and his cousin were playing out in the forest and making their way toward a stream they knew about. He said they were about halfway there or so when they stumbled on a clearing with a camp in it. He said it was a primitive shelter made out of hides with furs inside of it to sleep on, a small fire, and, oddly enough, pumpkins and squash sitting around. He said they stopped at the edge of the clearing, and his cousin wanted to go look, but he said it felt off, and since no one was around, he was worried the owner would come back and they would get caught. So they went around the clearing and continued to the stream. They played a while at the stream and, on the way back, decided to see if they could see if the owner of the camp had come back. He said they snuck up on it and everything was rotten, in a literal sense. The hide shelter and the furs inside were matted and decayed, the fire had long since gone cold, and the pumpkins and squash were moldy and caved in. He said they didn't enter the clearing and hauled back home. They told his grandpa what they saw, and of course he brushed it off as bullshit, so nothing ever came of it, and they never saw that camp or anything like it ever again. I often go hunting with my air rifle in the woods next to my dad's place. They don't have marked trails at all and are mainly unmapped except for a small wooden observation post that's abandoned, but that's besides the point. It was getting near sunset, and I was out with my air rifle. I always kept it with me when I went out after my first encounter. I just felt safer with it. I was maybe a mile or two deep into the woods, and the sun was setting soon. I had maybe an hour of sunlight left, and I thought it'd be best if I headed back now, as I had no flashlight or light source with me. As I went to leave, I heard this screech from maybe 200 yards into the tree line in the clearing I was in. This screech seemingly moved between spots and clearly came from one thing. I began to walk back and would occasionally hear something walking behind me. Whatever it was kept its distance and would stop making noise when I'd turn around. I never saw what was following me, but I could sense that something was. I picked up the pace as I felt extremely paranoid. I hadn't even smoked that day, so it was the weed. I eventually got home and said nothing to my dad, as I thought nothing of it. Deer sometimes get curious and follow you, and they can make weird noises. It felt different, though, and I can't really explain why. So anyway, I got home and ate my dinner before my dad went to sleep. It was around 10 p.m., and I was in my room. A couple of hours passed, and it was maybe midnight. It was still a while ago, so it's hard to remember, forgive me. It was then when I heard something pacing outside the van. This made me even more paranoid from the stuff in the woods. I thought it best to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I seriously regret it. What I saw put me in a state of derealization for at least a month. I opened my blinds to look outside, and I can't even begin to explain it. So there was this deer, right? But it was just all wrong. Firstly, it stood perfectly upright like a ducking person, and its eyes were on the front of its head, not the side. Secondly, it just stood there staring at me through the window. It felt like an eternity looking at it, and I hate to admit it, but I almost pissed myself, seriously. When I finally processed what I was looking at, I began shouting for my dad. He woke up angry and asked me what I was yelling for. I simply pointed out my window, and he too just stared at it. He looked at it the same way I did. We didn't speak, as I think we were both terrified and confused, and this ducking thing just kept looking at us both and didn't move an inch. My dad went and grabbed the air rifle, and he loaded it and pointed it at it. He cracked open the window a little and stuck the barrel through. He started yelling at it, and it just stood there. Still not moving. I felt like crying. It was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. My dad was shaking as well, and he looked pale. He then shot the damn thing, and it dropped onto all fours before darting into the woods. Everything about that thing was wrong. I can't explain it fully on here, as it was so weird words can't paint a picture. It freaked me out so bad. I have nightmares of the thing even now, always staring at me. It's come back since, and each time something's different about it. But it never stayed long. It would get spotted and run off. Damn thing probably didn't want to get shot again. I know I'm not crazy, my dad saw it too. Has anyone got a clue on what the duck that thing was? It was so disturbing that I spiraled into derealization, as I said before. This went on for about a month, and I went to therapy for it. I just want an explanation. I haven't seen it since, thank God, and I wish to never see it again. Someone please help me out. A buddy of mine still tells this story. I've hiked with him many times before, but I wasn't there this particular night. My friend is a very solemn big guy and wouldn't make something like this up. He's an outdoorsman and alone in the woods all the time, hiking, fishing, etc. He said he went for a night hike in the Catskills. We have hiked the trail he was on several times before, usually at night. At the summit is a beautiful rock ledge lookout that makes for the best sunrises. He said he got to the top very early in the morning in mid-September, hoping to catch the sunrise with the foliage starting to turn. Before the sun came up, he heard the cracking of branches near him. He got out his flashlight and scanned the edge of the trees that lined the drop-off. He noticed reflective yellow shining back at him between some of the trees. When he got a better look, he said he saw a full-grown man dead, staring at him, wearing a yellow rain jacket and hat. Scared the hell out of him, and he does not scare easy. He ran back down the mountain that night. The crazy part is that it was a warm night and no rain, not even a chance of precipitation in the forecast, and he was about 4 miles into the woods with no one else around. Followed by a light in the woods. Hi everyone, I want to share a story that happened to me a few weeks ago. I couldn't bring myself to talk about it back then. I'm really curious to hear your theories because I've scoured half the internet looking for answers and couldn't find anything that makes sense. Honestly, I'm starting to believe in the supernatural. It happened in my town, Hausenberg. A friend and I decided to go for a walk. There's a shallow lake here, right next to a forest and a mountain. Nearby, there's an old road that almost no one uses at night. Since it was winter, everything was covered in thick snow, and the lake was frozen solid. There aren't many animals in these woods, and hunting is strictly forbidden. There are very few houses around, the ones that exist are either high up on the mountain or near the road leading to the lake. We first met up during the day and went to the lake. Everything was normal, we were just messing around, hiking deep into the forest by a stream through the heavy snow. Afterward, we went to his place but eventually decided to head back into the forest near the lake again this time, in the evening. It was around 9 o'clock or 10 p.m. It was pitch black, and we didn't have any flashlights or light sources. My phone was dead, and his was tucked away in his pocket. You could see the stars, though not very clearly, and the moon was full and the sky was cloudless. We followed a trail that was heavily buried in snow. Despite the moonlight on the snow, it felt incredibly dark as we pushed deeper in. As we climbed further up a trail into the heart of the forest, we saw an arch in the darkness. I'm not sure what it was exactly, likely just tree branches, with a light shining beneath it. We decided right then not to go there and quickly turned the other way. We were talking as we walked, and at one point, my friend knelt down to tie his laces. That's when the first anomaly happened. It felt as if someone had suddenly shone a flashlight directly on us. But the moment we turned around toward the source, there was nothing, no light, no person, nothing. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else up to that point. The light had come from the direction we had just traveled. Determined to find an explanation, we turned back to investigate. We walked all the way back the way we came and encountered absolutely no one. However, my friend claimed to hear strange sounds, like a woman laughing. I didn't hear it myself, and, frankly, I still don't quite believe him on that part. We kept looking around, but there was no logical explanation. Eventually, we got tired and decided to head home, chalking it up to some weird coincidence. But as we were walking back, crossing a flat area covered in deep snow, it happened again. A light shone on us exactly like before. We spun around as fast as we could, but again, nothing. No source, no footprints. The light had come from roughly the same direction as the first time. I'll be honest, we were terrified. We bolted straight to his house and haven't brought it up until today. What do you guys think? Any ideas on what that could have been? Crying baby. This happened to me a few years ago at night while I was coming back home from a class. The class ends at 6 p.m. I travel by bus, so when we came to my stop, it was closer to 7 p.m. My house is in a woodsy area. From one side there is the mountain, and the other side is a little creek, like 15 feet downhill from the road. Since the road is surrounded by trees, it's a bit dark even during the day. And there's a particular section of the road that's way darker than the rest of the road because the vegetation is denser. So as I was walking down the street in that particular section, I heard a baby crying. I stopped and listened. It was coming from the creek side. I'm afraid of the dark. Actually, I'm afraid to be stranded in the dark. So I have a flashlight clipped to my belt all the time, and I have more gear in my backpack too, because I enjoy urbex. So I shine the flashlight onto the trees, hoping to see what the hell is going on. Is there a baby stranded? I couldn't see anything further than 5 feet because the vegetation is too dense. There's a small path to get to the creek made out of loose stones and exposed tree roots. I slowly descended the hill towards the creek, following the sound of the crying, and as I got closer, I could see the creek and hear the crying more clearly. So I was looking around because the crying baby should be close enough for me to see. And then I realized the crying is coming from above me. Up in the trees. Then I remembered there's a thing called ghosts in this world and babies don't climb trees, so I ran out of there. I told my mom about the incident, omitting the part where I went into the woods, and she advised me not to follow those sounds because she didn't want to find me with a broken neck in the creek. So that's the story. Thank you for listening. Owl Hollow. I honestly don't know why I'm even writing this. It's not like anyone's going to believe me anyway. Maybe it's just to get it out of my head. Maybe it's some kind of warning. I don't know. Last October, I went hiking alone near Mount Hood. I was trying to get away from everything. Work, noise, people. I found this spot on an old Forest Service map called Owl Hollow, near Jordan Creek. Sounded perfect. Secluded, quiet. Barely even mentioned online. The first few hours were fine. Peaceful, even. Just the sound of the creek and my boots crunching gravel. It felt good. Like I could breathe again. But sometime in the afternoon, that feeling started creeping in. You know the one. Like somebody's watching you. At first, I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was being stupid. In big woods, alone, of course you're going to feel jumpy. But it kept getting worse. Around 3 p.m. I looked off the trail into the trees, and there was a pair of eyes staring at me through the brush. Not blinking. Just watching. It wasn't a deer. I know what deer look like. This was different. Lower to the ground. Wrong shape. No sound at all. I kept hiking. Probably faster than I should have. About an hour later, I came around a bend, and there they were. A man and a woman standing in the middle of the trail. I don't know how to explain it, everything about them just felt off immediately. Their clothes were weird, like they'd walked out of an old photograph. Faded colors, stiff fabric, almost dusty. I tried to say hello, maybe ask if they needed help, but my voice just kind of died. They didn't say anything either. Just stared. And when they passed me, they both turned their heads at the same time and smiled. I can't even describe it right. It wasn't human. Their mouths stretched way too wide, and their teeth were wrong. Sharp and dirty. And their eyes ducking turned black. Not like dark irises, black. Like bottomless pits. I almost threw up. I almost ran. But they just kept walking like nothing had happened, disappearing into the woods behind me. I should have left right then. I should have turned around, sprinted back to my truck, and never looked back. But I didn't. I kept going. Dumbass. By the time I set up camp that night, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the tent up. It didn't matter. I wasn't sleeping anyway. As the sun went down, the woods around me got wrong. Too quiet. No birds. No bugs. Nothing but the creek and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Then I started seeing them. First one. Then two. Then more. 17 or 18 of them crouched in the trees, peeking from behind rocks, half buried in the tall grass. All with the same twisted smiles. All with those black eyes. I sat there by the fire, clutching my pistol, feeling like I was going to pass out from terror. They didn't move. They didn't get closer. They just watched. I don't know what snapped, but I stood up and fired 2 shots straight into the air. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and painful. They didn't even flinch. That's when I ran. I grabbed my pack and ran like my life depended on it, because honestly, I think it did. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't even remember driving home. I just remember slamming the door behind me and sitting there in the dark for hours, shaking, gun still in my hand. I haven't told anybody until now. People would think I'm crazy. Hell, I feel crazy sometimes when I replay it in my head. But I know what I saw. And I'm telling you. If you ever find yourself near Owl Hollow, turn around. Get out while you can. Some places are better off forgotten. Tall man who walks perfectly at the same angle. I don't know why I'm thinking of this now, but it was one of the most eerie moments of my life, and I just had to check if there was anyone with a similar story or who knew of folklore that this may relate to. Some friends and I were meeting to smoke. They are in a car together and are meeting me at a park to pick me up. So we meet at this parking lot in the park. To explain it as best as I can, the lot is long and narrow, and on either side of the lot are 2 soccer fields that go along the long way. The far side of the lot and soccer fields meet a forest and outskirts of town. I park in the very middle where the only streetlight is. This is at night, and there is a heavy rain. My friends pull up, I hop out, hop in, and we are leaving the lot when we see someone walking directly towards my car. I brought up the soccer fields just to highlight how ridiculous this was. This man walked a whole half a soccer field's distance at the exact same angle. I would explain it almost as a bishop crossing the board in chess. Like staying on the exact same line. At this point I'm telling my friends we have to wait in the street. I thought my car was going to be getting broken into or something. He reaches my car, another step or 2 forward and he would have run into it. At this point they proceed to turn and go towards the back of my car, reach the end of the back, turn again, reach the far side of the back of my car, turn again, go up a little further towards the front, and then turn on the exact same imaginary line he was walking before my car got in the way and proceed to walk off into the woods in the rain. The pace of their walk never changed. It wasn't like a speed walk but was not slow either, it was very methodical. We always described it as the "it follows" monster, and we happened to see it on its way to a target. I did immediately have them take me back to my car so we could go park at a Walmart parking lot to meet instead. The Appalachian Mountains in Georgia. My experiences living in the Appalachian Mountains. Specifically, I lived near the Blue Ridge Mountains, one of the farthest ends of the Appalachian Mountains, about 10 minutes away from Jasper, Georgia. I was in 3rd grade when I lived there, and my school was entirely fenced in. Behind the metal gate, I remember there was a large section of woods, then a field, and lastly our playground and school. We usually had at the least 3 teachers watching us when we played outside. We weren't allowed near the fence whatsoever after 2 kids, Brain and Colin, fake names, same initials, hopped the fence and started to walk around the woods until the teachers noticed and everyone was sent inside until the teachers could find them, and Colin was in my class. When I say he was downright terrified, I mean it. He didn't say what happened, but less than a month later he switched schools. After that, we weren't even allowed into the field near the woods. Another occurrence near the fence or in the woods was the presence of strange noises. Although the forest was not very thick, it was large enough that visibility was limited. But you could hear everything, and every once in a while, the bugs and wind would quiet, allowing you to faintly hear one of 3 things, either motorbikes or a very hard to describe sound similar to what you would hear in a car shop, like a low hum of machinery. Or the worst one, footsteps. I hated those woods. I was part of the group that didn't have anyone to pick us up from either the school or the bus stop until about an hour after school ended, so I joined the after-school program, known as the ASP. Young teacher aides and others usually watched us. We usually stayed in the computer room, but when it was nice, we went outside to the older kids' playground farther from the woods. We would remain at the basketball court while the other children engaged in basketball with the aides. I did not participate in the game, so I would sit to the side, gazing into the forest or keeping score for the other children. As I stared into the forest that one day, my ears began to ring, and I saw the fence shake as if something were climbing it, even though it was a still summer day with not much wind at all. I felt a chill and turned away. The moment I did, everything ceased, and the aide instructed us all to return indoors. I stopped looking at the woods. I believe something was drawing kids to those woods because I have tons of stories of kids sneaking off during recess, staying outside, and lingering near the fence. One kid, D, had snuck off during the extra recess our class earned, meaning there was only 1 teacher rather than 3 watching us. D was absent for 15 minutes. Our entire class searched thoroughly, except in the woods. And 15 minutes later we found her sitting in the corner next to the side entrance, but that was practically in plain sight with a class of people looking for 15 minutes. Someone would have seen her multiple times, but she swore up and down she was there the whole time, and she looked freaked out. She started sobbing the moment we found her. She composed herself and brushed it off, as she had just gotten into a disagreement with Quinn. Nothing about that made sense. We were all just playing freeze tag together, and sure, they had bickered a bit, but they were always bickering. It just didn't make sense. I had what I believe was an encounter over the summer. I was off-road motorcycle camping well away from any possible campers on the Colville Indian Reservation in eastern Washington. I found this breezy, cool copse with a grassy area around a small running creek. Though it was quite hot that day, it was 10 degrees cooler here. The area had game trails running to this small clearing. I set up my tent and read until darkness came. I had fallen asleep and was awoken by a massive thud at 12:14. I checked my watch. I later checked for earthquakes in the area. There were none. The creek had provided white noise, but that was interrupted several times by splashing. I stayed put. The doors of my tent did not face the area the sound came from, and just listened. I heard a deep sigh and then footfalls away up the hill. In the morning, I looked around. The heat had been in the 100s, and the earth was firm, but in one spot by the creek, it was moist. In that spot appeared to be a very large and deep heel print. My size 12 camp shoe easily fit in the print. I hadn't seen it the day before, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't from my motorcycle boots. There were no indications of a separate heel, and it was bigger anyway. There were no toes or anything forward of the arch. I tried to make a print next to it to see how far my 200 pounds would sink in. It was about 1/4 inch, whereas the other print was well over an inch deep. My theory on what happened: a very large animal came down the hill, entered my camp, knelt down and drank some water, then returned from where it came. I believe, from the evidence at hand, that it was a Sasquatch. Inhuman entity on rural property. I'm from a rural forested area in lower central British Columbia. My parents built a house in this area when I was 5 years old, and we moved in shortly after. It is a very rural area with only one neighbor in sight across the valley. From the time we moved into that house, I had recurring night terrors about aliens or entities trying to get in, bad enough that my mom now says she should have taken me to see a psychologist about it. The night terrors ended when my parents adopted a German Shepherd who subsequently wore a path around the house. The feeling of something wrong in the woods by one side of the house remained. Only one window in the house faces that direction, and there is often a feeling that I could not look out the window, like there's a warning. When I was in that area of the yard at night, I could never force myself to look in that direction. The dogs would often growl and raise their hackles while looking in that direction, but their behavior was different compared to when they encountered a wild animal. When I adopted another German Shepherd, she took over the trail again after the previous dog passed, and it felt like the energy subsided to some degree. Even now, years later, the land still feels unsettling when I visit, as if something is always watching and lurking but cannot cross the property line for some reason. I have nightmares about an entity trying to enter the house, but it's bearable with my dogs, who seem to ward it off. My Schnauzer only helped a small degree, but when I got my Great Dane, the presence felt like it withdrew more. She also paces around the house and does not like that area of the forest. I have previously had experiences with ghosts and shadow people in other areas, and it felt nothing like this entity. This entity feels much older, inhuman, and harmful. But like it has rules it has to follow, and as long as we don't look at it or interact with it, it can't come closer. When it was dark, I would feel the need to close all the blinds because it was trying to see in, but I would turn my head away so that I did not look into the dark while I was closing the blinds. After my grandfather passed away, I had an extremely vivid dream that an entity pretending to be him came up the stairs of the house and looked at me. In the dream, I stopped him from coming in and immediately woke up in terror. It felt like the same presence. I spoke to a pagan witch previously, who said there was something on the land, a dark territorial presence. Another person said she and some teenagers were chased through the woods by a bipedal entity that she knew they could not look at. She said it sounded like the same sort of entity. Has anyone else ever had an experience with something like this? This is the only place I have ever had a feeling like this, and despite other paranormal experiences, this is the only one that has ever caused fear for me. Ghost in the campground. I'm 31 as of writing this. As a child and teenager, I had several frightening supernatural experiences, but I had no one to share them with. This story recounts the first time I saw something unusual. When I was 6 years old, my parents took me and my sister camping. On the second night I woke up and had to use the restroom. I couldn't wake up either of my parents or my little sister, aged 5, so I, in my childhood wisdom, decided to go by myself. I had never truly feared the dark prior to reaching pre-adolescence, a distinct experience for another discussion, and the moon was full. It was so bright that it resembled daytime, allowing me to see the path to the park's restrooms without any difficulty. I heard an owl and saw a fox curiously trailing along behind me. They sometimes follow people to see what they're doing. I got to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, and left. I was walking back, and I saw a woman in a long white outfit. My mom wore a long white shirt to sleep in on camping trips, so I thought I was about to get in trouble and hid behind a tree. I didn't hear her pass by, and I peeked out to see where she was. A woman dressed in an old-fashioned dress was floating by, low to the ground. She had a bonnet on and was pure white, except for her eyes, which were bright blue. She drifted up the trail, turned right, and vanished. I ran all the way back to the tent and laid back down. I didn't go back to sleep. Later on, when I was around 10, we went back to the campground, and I walked on the trail where the woman had gone. At the end of the trail, there was a chimney and fireplace, along with an information board. Apparently, a family had lived in the park in the early 1800s, and the mother had been burnt alive in the fire that burnt down the house. My village in Transylvania has a story that everyone knows. It's the reason I'll never go back to the hills at night. The following story may seem exaggerated, yet it's the version most locals in the area have grown up with. I was born in a small, isolated village in Transylvania, Romania. The story I'm about to tell you is roughly 50 years old. Everyone in my hometown knows it by heart, and even though it happened decades ago, it still chills me to the bone. In our region, haymaking is a tradition. We cut the grass and leave it to dry in the sun for a few days. Once it's dry, we pile it into massive haystacks, about 4 meters high, secured by a thick wooden pole driven straight through the center. The story follows a newlywed couple who headed up a hill on the edge of the village to finish their harvest. The area was lonely, just rolling slopes surrounded by dense thickets and ancient trees. There wasn't a soul in sight. While they were working, the husband suddenly turned to his wife. He told her he had urgent business back in the village and had to leave her alone for a while. But before he left, his tone changed. He became dead serious, almost frantic. He warned her that wild animals, stray dogs or wolves, might come out of the woods once he was gone. "The moment I leave," he told her, "climb to the very top of the haystack. If anything tries to get to you, use this wooden pitchfork to beat it back." As soon as he disappeared into the tree line, a heavy silence fell over the hill. Within 5 minutes, the bushes rustled. A massive, mangy dog erupted from the undergrowth. It didn't just bark, it was snarling with a human-like ferocity, lunging at the haystack, trying to tear its way up to her. The woman fought for her life, screaming and kicking, striking the beast repeatedly with her wooden staff. At one point, the dog managed to snag the hem of her dress, tearing at the red cotton fabric before she finally managed to kick it squarely in the jaw. Suddenly, the dog stopped. It stared at her for a long second, then turned and vanished back into the shadows of the forest. A few minutes later, her husband climbed back up the hill. He looked tired but calm. He asked if she was okay, and through her tears, she told him about the attack. He hugged her, whispered that it was over now, and told her to relax. They sat down in the grass to rest. The husband laid his head in her lap, looking up at her, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. The woman started to calm down, looking into his eyes, until he let out a wide, hearty laugh. Her heart stopped. Stuck between his molars were bright red threads. Frayed pieces of red cotton, identical to the material of her torn dress. She realized in that horrific second that the dog hadn't just bitten her dress. It had tasted it. The story goes that she managed to keep her face neutral just long enough to get back to the village. She didn't say a word. She packed her things, divorced him immediately, and fled the province, never setting foot in that village again. Transylvania is beautiful, but some things in those hills aren't exactly human. Hearing noises in the woods in Middle Georgia. I live on 2 acres of wooded land in Middle Georgia. I live next to a vacant house where the owner passed, and my other neighbors are an older couple. Both neighbors are about 100 to 200 yards from my house. For about a year I've been fine going out late at night or to my carport, about 40 yards from the house, with no issues. Until recently, I've started hearing voices coming from the woods. One night around 9 p.m. I was outside smoking a cigarette on my porch when I heard a baby crying from about 50 yards away, which is just in the tree line. The cries would happen about 2 minutes apart and sound closer each time. The worst part is that they sounded like my 1-year-old son's cry. Hearing this alarmed me because my neighbors are far and nobody has any babies. About 2 nights later, I heard someone saying "daddy" in a voice that sounded familiar and similar to my son's. This time my wife had heard it too, and we went inside immediately. Today, while my wife was letting our dog out to use the restroom, she heard whistling from outside near our house. Immediately after, our dog's hair stood up, and he went outside, barking at the air. I have observed paranormal activity throughout my life, but nothing that others have been able to see or hear. Whenever I go outside at night and hear these voices, I feel a spine-chilling sensation that something bad is nearby. I am also anxious because my son appears to awaken at random times during the night, screaming as if he is frightened. His window is facing the tree line, where I hear the noises. I don't know if he is just crying because he wants us for comfort or if something is scaring him and he can't say anything. I'm hoping to get some insight if anyone has had any similar experiences or any fixes. The night we don't talk about. I live in a small town outside of Ottawa, where cornfields are located next to the school, and lockdowns occur because cows occasionally escape from nearby farms. However, that's not the main point. There's an old legend from my hometown that I actually believe, especially since my 2 friends and I, when we were foolish teenagers, went out at 12 a.m. wanting to take a walk in the forest. And we all wished we had never done it. We don't talk to one of the girls anymore. She didn't see what my best friend and I did, anyway. Enough backstory. On to the story. Sorry, we went out at 12 a.m., bored out of our minds. After about 30 minutes, we were all camping in our friend's front yard. Ish is walking around our town trying to get towards the forest. There's an old cemetery near the forest, and surrounding it are some old houses that are falling apart. There's an old story about a married couple who lived in the old house at the far end of the street. Back at the old broken down house, it was said that the husband fell in love with a woman, and the wife found out and confronted him, but sadly he took great offense. It is said that he ended her. which has since been boarded up and surrounded by destroyed stones. Now it's said she still floats around near the house, never going further than the cemetery. That night, while my friends and I were fooling around near the cemetery, I paused, and my best friend did the same. Afterwards, we both talked and admitted that we felt an unbearable amount of dread, but we ignored it and kept walking like idiots. We were young, ha. However, when we turned the corner and the cemetery came into full view, we saw a woman floating. Or at least she appeared to be floating. She appeared to be soaked from head to toe, with water dripping off her. She wore a long dress. It was blowing in the wind. I can still remember it like it was yesterday when we noticed it. I grabbed my friend's hands, staring. I asked so quietly, I have no idea how they heard it if they saw what I was seeing. The friend we don't talk to anymore looked at me weird and said she saw nothing, but my best friend sounded like she was going to cry, telling us we should head back to our tent. I agreed, and we quickly started heading back. I kept looking back, and so did she. I have never moved so fast while trying to look calm. My best friend and I don't go out anymore at night, we can't. Not only are we too scared to, but it feels as if we're asking for trouble if we do. I used to do star photography in the middle of the Northwoods wilderness. Here are some unexplainable things I experienced. One spring night I went out with my camera gear on a mile-long walk to a good place to watch the stars. It was a long and wide trail I was very familiar with, and I walked that area without a flashlight often. I would like to not use a light because I had a higher chance of seeing a beautiful animal that would otherwise be startled away. I also love the darkness. Anyways, I arrive at the viewing location and set up my tripod and camera. I start taking some long exposure photos when I hear some rustling across the small body of water I am near. I am very familiar with the wildlife of that area, and while there are a few bears and wolves, the population is very small. It's an isolated island with more coyotes than anything. So hearing some noises in the woods didn't bother me at all, but I tuned in to listen, trying to figure out what it could be. Moments later, whatever it was began to let out the deepest booming yells I've ever heard in my entire life. It sounded like both noises of distress and anger from what I can best describe. I have never felt unnerved out in the woods of that area at night, but those noises made my blood run cold. It let out another series of yells, and my body snapped from being frozen to scooping up my tripod and sprinting with it the mile back to my car. All the while I could hear that bone-chilling yell, although it was growing faint as I put distance between me and it. I will admit that the experience really shook me to my core, and I haven't gone out for a night hike since then. My only explanation is it could have been a bear in pain or a really large badger. They can make some scary noises. Even though my logical brain knows it wasn't some giant unknown creature, my inner feelings tell me it was something I had never experienced before. The second story happened before the first, so I was still in my night hike phase of my life. I was on a hike with my girlfriend at the time not far from the location in the first story. We were just going to walk down the straight path until we reached the end and then turn back. On our way in, the forest was still and serene with deep blackness surrounding us on all sides. I can't fully explain why, but we love this kind of stuff. We reached the turnaround point, and not too long into our return, we noticed this bright red glowing dot in a large tree. It was considerably bright, and we definitely didn't notice it on our walk in. At first I thought it must be a light from building just beyond the forest. But as we approached, we realized it was coming from the center of a big oak tree. Almost like a reflector but much brighter and with no light sources around. I also have walked that trail at night with no flashlight many times and never noticed this. We kind of got creeped out and made our way back out. Not sure what that was, but it was a bit eerie in the moment. This last one has more to do with the first story but didn't necessarily happen out in the woods. I was out in the field behind my house that is surrounded by the forest. The same forest. I had heard the noises my last night going out like that, but on the opposite side of the woods from where I was. I was out with my tripod again photographing Orion when I heard these two loud thumps on the ground suddenly. Like the sound of someone purposely stomping their feet really hard to make as much noise as possible. I was kind of perplexed until, a second later, I heard, but could not see, those loud, thumping steps coming quickly, thundering in my direction across the field. I turned and ran with everything I could grab as fast as I could manage with heavy equipment. I was convinced I wouldn't make it from there to my back door. The entire run it felt like something was going to grab me from behind. I made it back and felt a strong sense of dread that night I couldn't really place. I was always the most skeptical person in my group and had no fear of the dark forest, etc., but after those few experiences I have a bit of a different perspective of the Northwoods. Respect, for sure, but also a notable sense of fear. When I stayed with my friend at her grandma's, I found an old abandoned cabin that I deemed my spot. Her grandma's house was the party house, hella people, drinking, and smoking, so when I got tired of everybody, I'd go to my cabin and chill by myself. She knew this. One evening I was bored and wanted to go to my spot, maybe a 15-minute walk, so I started heading that way. The area the cabin was in is wooded, and you cannot see it from the road, it's deep in the woods. As I walked up to the cabin and could see it, it felt like the life got drained out of me. I don't even know how to explain how I felt in this moment, but something was telling me to get the hell out of there, so I did and decided to just walk along the road and back. As I'm walking back from around a bend, I see my friend leaving from the area of the cabin, and I catch up to her, and when I say, "WSP?" she asks me, "Why didn't you come out of the cabin when I called your name?" I was super confused because I had not even been in the cabin. I told her this, and she laughed and thought I was ducking with her. She told me, "No? You were definitely in that cabin, I saw you," and kind of nervously looked at me to confirm it for her. I shook my head and pulled out my phone and showed her a picture I had taken of some lizards less than 10 minutes before this happened. It was dated and time-stamped, and clearly I was never in that cabin. She went completely pale and said we needed to go now. Got the hell away from that place, and I've never gone back. To this day she swears she saw me in there, but it was literally impossible. Strange happenings in my grandmother's woods. My grandmother's property in Maryland used to be a plantation and a camp for Native Americans. It also used to be a logging property around the turn of the century. My father grew up on the property. My grandparents built their house there in the 1960s. It's all woods, for 28 acres, but it's connected on all sides to 1,000 acres of forest. I grew up walking these woods, hunting, and rarely camping there. When I was about 4 or 5, at my great-grandmom's house right next door, I saw a man wearing a large hat with a mustache. He disappeared as soon as I got a good look at him. I told this story to my grandmother, and she asked me to describe him: tall, dark hair, a little gaunt. She said that it sounded like it was my great-grandfather who died 10 years before I was born. My father ended his life in the woods there when I was 17. Still, despite this, there are a lot of good memories, but some that still freak me out. He always told me never to hunt from his personal tree stand without him. Less than a week after he died, a tree fell on the ladder and took out its rungs, just the rungs. The stand is still there to this day. He always told me that when he was hunting those woods as a child and young adult, he would hear or see things he couldn't explain. Voices calling his name, footsteps that when he shined his light on, there was no one there, etc. I personally had multiple experiences just after dusk when I was tracking a deer. I shot off a string of lights about chest level moving in a line about 100 yards in front of me. This area is relatively wet at times, so I deemed it to be a will-o'-the-wisp, as when I shined my flashlight, bam, no one was there. But this has happened even during dry times and has happened more than once. Not reflectors on the trees, distinctly moving. Harriet Tubman actually traveled this way with some slaves from the nearby plantation, which led to one of the biggest bounties in U.S. history by the plantation owner. There are still slave graves on the property, marked only by large boulders, and the adjacent property where the manor house is still had shackles in the basement well into the 1990s. I was walking through the woods when I was around 16. It was just me. I distinctly remember someone, very clearly, shouting my name just in time for me to turn around and see a baseball-sized rock flying past my head. We have no rocks over that way. Also, when I was hunting one time in November around age 18, I had a stand of trees, mainly loblolly pine, behind me. Big, strong trees. Zero wind. One fell down, all of a sudden. 5 minutes later, another one, then another one, and so on. I hightailed it out of there. Even before my dad died, I had nightmares of the area despite how much I love it. I feel like I'm trapped in the woods with no way out while a supernatural entity chases me, or I stumble upon an abandoned house in the woods there and see death, decay, etc. Something isn't right back there. What the hell is that thing? My friends and I go hunting every Sunday. I don't mean animal hunting. We've all had so many paranormal experiences, we decided to take some of them out. Last night, we returned to our usual spot to check out a rock that had made us all feel queasy during our previous visit. Walking up, I almost blacked out, so I decided to pour holy water on it. The forest did not like that, as voices and whispers immediately picked up as well as swirls of shadows. We slowly made our way back to my car and sat in it for a while. There were other people in our spot, so we couldn't exactly get out with our enchanted weapons. People do like calling cops for that shit. After about an hour or so inside it, we heard something that could only be described as predator chirps. Or I guess maybe it was clicking like The Last of Us. I thought maybe it was just me since I was half asleep. But no. The second I heard it, from seemingly right outside my window, my eyes shot open, and everybody in the car looked at each other and went, "You heard that?" Now it was cold outside, and we had been breathing without having my car on, saving gas. So the windows were fogged to hell. I turned the car on to defrost them, and by the time they cleared, nothing was there. Still some other cars. So either those people didn't see whatever made that noise, or they chose to ignore it. Or it could throw its voice. I assume that if they had seen something capable of making that noise, they would have quickly left the area. After that, a few more shadows. I've barely been able to stay awake today, after already having slept 12-ish hours. One buddy feels weird, and the other just feels off too. I also woke up to find those little clinger plants in my bed. There was nothing on me like that last night. Does anyone have any idea what this thing could have been? I was hiking Sourdough Mountain in the North Cascades. It's a pretty grueling hike, like 13 miles and 6,000 feet of elevation gain. I met a random couple at the trailhead, and we decided to hike together. Halfway up the mountain, at a small clearing, I hear a tree knock. Then 2 more tree knocks. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was like someone banging on a tree with a baseball bat. If you have ever hiked a genuine mountain, the notion that someone is off the trail, deep in the woods, playing pranks on others by banging on trees appears utterly absurd, particularly when you are 3 hours up the side of a steep mountain. Anyways, nothing else happened, and we reached the peak at about 3:30 p.m. There were a few hikers coming down the mountain as we started pretty late in the morning, so we were the last ones on the mountain. After enjoying the view, we start our way back down the switchbacks. The couple was hiking quickly, so I fell behind as I was enjoying the views and the berries and just the entire experience. The couple disappeared from view, and I was totally alone. Now I know you're supposed to make noise while hiking, as there are tons of bears up there, so I was singing a little song to make noise when all of a sudden I heard rustling and footsteps over my right shoulder. It sounded like a biped, but I knew there were no people behind me, so it freaked me out a bit. Then the footsteps would mirror mine. I would stop, and the rustling stopped. I would start and they would start again. This really creeped me out, but I still had no idea what it was. Then the entire forest went totally silent. It was like a heavy blanket was over the atmosphere. No wind, no birds, no bugs, nothing. This was the creepiest moment I had ever experienced until shortly after, when suddenly it felt like I was being watched. It was such a strong feeling, it was like 2 laser beams were burning into my head. It felt like I was a prey animal and some predator was about to attack me. Total instinctual fear. I continued hiking and turning around to see what it was but saw nothing. I turned around a few times until I reached a small clearing in the trees and turned and looked, and there it was. Sitting about 80 yards away up the mountain. It was sitting or standing, not exactly sure because the bottom half was covered by leaves and bushes, but there it was. A giant hairy man/gorilla looking creature. It was dark brown and had long hair all over it. It didn't look like fur, it looked like hair. Massive shoulders. It looked like an old school football player with the pads on. No neck. The head looked like it was right on the shoulders. It looked like the head had a slight conical shape to it. Huge eye socket/brow ridge. Huge dark eyes. Couldn't see any whites, but it was 80 yards away, and I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it was real. I was in shock and awe as I stared at this thing. When I looked into its eyes, it was like I got total tunnel vision, and it was hypnotizing. It felt like I was in a trance as I stared at it. I said under my breath, "Holy shit," and did a small nervous laugh. That's when it moved its arms. It was so enormous, and when it moved, I snapped out of my trance, and my rational mind took control, overwhelming me with the most intense fear and dread as I thought, "Holy shit, that's a massive wild animal, and I have no idea what it's thinking or what it's going to do." The entire visual encounter from the moment I first saw it to the moment I turned around and left must have only been 1 minute, maybe 45 seconds, it felt like hours. It couldn't have been more than 1 minute in real time. It felt like I was about to die or get eaten. I just turned quickly and continued hiking down the mountain. I just turned away and left. And I didn't hear anything after that. I ran down the mountain so fast that what was supposed to take 2.5 to 3 hours took me an hour and a half. I didn't stop running until I got to my car. My brother's ghost story. My brother was a ghost hunter. He ran a crew with his friends called Paulding Paranormal Society. He made 3 movies, not big ones or anything, just for the downtown theater. He told me a story one time about when he and his friend went to the oldest cemetery in our town, called White Oak Cemetery. There are settlers buried there, and rumors around town say there's a witch buried there too. They pulled up and started getting their equipment out of the car when they heard something running in the woods. When they turned around, they saw candles lit in a circle, and in the middle was a black rope. He picked it up, and let me just say, there have been multiple reports of satanic rituals being performed there. Like, the police actually have to patrol it now. Then they saw a white figure run through the woods and disappear. He said they weren't spooked but more confused about what just happened. After that, they started setting up their equipment, cameras, a voice recorder that could pick up something as small as a skittle dropping from 5 feet away, a spirit box, and some kind of dotted laser. I never really knew what that was for. They turned on the spirit box, and immediately something came through saying satanic and that multiple people were watching them. They were supposed to stay there for 2 hours, but because of all the warnings, they only stayed for 1. As they were leaving down the long gravel road, his friend said he saw 3 people in robes sitting in the woods. He's got a bunch more stories, I'll share them later, but that's all for now. Something was calling my name from the woods last night. I just want to say that this just happened about 6 hours ago. It was a short encounter, if you could even call it that. I'm honestly curious if anyone knows what this could be. A little context, my mom lives with me, and she's out at all hours of the night walking her dog. We live in Indiana. So, I was walking home around 11 p.m. yesterday from my friend's house. There's a little hill that leads to my road and has train tracks going over it. One side is the start of my neighborhood, and the other is 6 miles of wilderness on a slow incline that the train tracks cut through. The route I took home would normally be driven, but I don't have a car, and I usually don't mind the walk. In fact, I love going on night walks, which is a shame because I'm not comfortable doing that anymore. I got just past the train tracks and stopped by the woods because I heard branches cracking. Initially, I thought the noise was caused by a deer, as they are quite common, and I planned to continue on my way and mind my own business like a normal person would until I heard someone call my name. In this high-pitched voice, it repeated my name a few times, the same pitch, the same cadence, like a recording. It sounded like my mom. She's out walking her dog pretty often, but she'd never call for me in that pitch, let alone from the woods. It did, however, sound like the voice she would use to call for her dog. I have to say that I wasn't inebriated in any form or way, and I had a good night's sleep before, so I know I wasn't hallucinating this. I've never frozen before in the way that I had, and I've never felt that afraid before. It was nerve-wracking. It was about 50 feet into the woods, slowly making its way closer to me. I didn't hear footsteps or branches breaking after the first time, but every few seconds it repeated my name, and it sounded closer, so I can only assume. I walked the rest of the way to my house and got inside safe. My mom was inside with her dog like I thought she would be. I warned her about someone weird in the woods and told her to wake me up to go with her if she takes the dog for a walk or uses the bathroom. I haven't really been able to sleep since, and I'm mentally drained and exhausted after that experience. At first I was thinking it was a skinwalker or something, but I'm nowhere near a native reserve. I have no idea what this could be, I just know that I can't go on my nighttime walks anymore, and I'm scared for my mom and her dog. We're in Indiana. If there's anything you guys could think of that could explain this, please let me know. The voice I heard sounded exactly like hers, but it definitely wasn't her. I didn't see a face or anything like that, I just heard her voice. Anything could help, thank you in advance. If you have any questions, I can answer them to the best of my ability. Florida summer camp has so many shadow people. What are these things and why are they all here? I spent the summer working at a summer sleepaway camp in the remote wilderness of Florida. This camp owns over 100 acres of pure forest, and before it was a camp, it was an airbase. If you recognize it, don't say anything for privacy reasons, thanks. I will focus on stories I received directly from the source, which have been shared for quite a few years now, possibly much longer. Counselors and campers alike have been having weird experiences out there with tall shadow people. While camps are usually filled with fun storytelling, there is an unsettling amount of correlation between some of the stories I've heard about this specific phenomenon. And some of these people who have had these experiences don't know the stories from the others, like new campers having the same experiences as counselors from years ago. They all describe the same thing: tall, thin, shadowy figures of men, sometimes one, sometimes multiple. Their heads are apparently quite a bit taller than the top bunks in the cabins, which is a good 8 feet at least. Campers have described them as having to duck to get through the doorway. In the past couple of years, an entire cabin has reported seeing these creatures twice. Typically, the counselors would assume that the kids were just trying to play pranks, but due to the overwhelming number of similar reports from campers, these incidents are now being taken more seriously. I feel like something weird is going on, especially when multiple 13-year-old boys are crying because they're so freaked out. On one of these occasions, The campers said these shadow figures came into the cabin and pushed their bunks around. The next morning marks were left on the floor where the bunks had been moved. On a different occasion, only one figure came in and just stood facing the corner, and the entire cabin witnessed this. On multiple occasions, only one camper has seen this figure, and it has only stared at them from the middle of the room. What on earth is going on out here? What is this things? I have not had any strange experiences all summer except for one. I was in the cabin on the counselor's side about to take a nap but was not asleep yet. I had just laid down. I was on my side facing the wall. There was nobody else in the cabin. Twice within the 45 minutes I was there, something sat on the bed behind me, so the cheap mattress sagged like it would if a person sat down and I rolled a little. Of course when I turn around, nothing's there. I'm not sure if that's related to the shadow figure stories, though. I was staying in Fairleigh, Vermont, with my girlfriend's family for a summer reunion of theirs. Fairleigh has pretty close proximity to the Appalachian Mountains. It was a rainy night around 3 a.m., and I wanted to smoke a cigarette. They don't allow smoking in their lake cabin, so to be respectful, I stepped onto my girlfriend's bedroom balcony area. I didn't want to walk all the way downstairs and smoke on the porch. Besides, the rain had died down enough that it was more of a drizzle at that hour. Everyone on the property, girlfriend, her mom and aunt, were already asleep at this hour. Figured I could sneak a smoke on the balcony just fine. I should add it was very dark around their cabin. The moonlight hits the lake, but the wooded area blocks out much of the moonlight, creating pretty pitch black darkness around their cabin. You couldn't see more than maybe 20 feet from their cabin's exterior lights. I stepped out onto the balcony, cigarette in mouth, and had trouble sparking my lighter, bad flint or some shit. The third try it lit up, and as I was taking that first drag to light it, I heard something call my name in the dark woods nearby. "Hey! Chris!" The way it sounded was a fractured, almost mechanical-like voice. It didn't sound human, more like something imitating human speech. "Hey Chris," like it put emphasis on the wrong letters. My hair on my neck stood up, goosebumps and fear washing over me. Instant fight or flight. A sensation I hadn't felt since I was robbed at gunpoint on my 14th birthday. The cigarette dropped from my mouth, and I was back inside in an instant. Woke my girlfriend up because I was scared shitless. We went out to the balcony with a flashlight to look around the surrounding area but didn't see anything. It took me a few hours before I was able to sleep. I just lay there, heart racing, shaking in the bed for a solid hour. I still had about 3 more nights at that cabin before our trip was over. I've never been back and probably never will. Pretty sure it was a skinwalker or some shit, which I had never really believed in until that night. Can someone tell me what I saw? Before I share this story, I want to say that I'm not at all a supernormal believing person, but I don't know what to think about this. I was on a hike with my Cavachon in County Antrim, Northern Ireland. He is not a dog that would pause during a hike, he engages in a great deal of running and jumping. When we reached a part of the trail that I hadn't visited before, he stopped and quickly looked to his right into the small forest. I heard something before I saw it. It sounded like a wolf howl, but since we don't have wolves in Ireland, it might have been a deeper sound, almost like a bear, which we also don't have. I saw this probably 8 to 10 feet ape-looking creature, maybe black or brown, walking on and off its 4 legs, sometimes walking upright like a human. I got a look at it for maybe 2 seconds, and it went behind a tree, and I lost sight of it. I had to literally put the lead on my dog and pull him to get him to walk again. I was shook. Does anyone have any idea what it was? What's in the trees? Since being illegally evicted, we wound up in an old camper at our buddy's family home. I had heard stories of something pursuing my fiancé across this property from the treetops before, back when he lived in a shack on the same property. The owner of the shack told him, "It's just a bear." Even as he argued that bears can leap from treetop to treetop. "It's just a bear. Don't worry about it. It's just a bear." Even as everyone present heard it land on the roof and pace all night, "It's just a bear." Well, now that we're in the camper, the bear seems to be enjoying itself. My first night, I was here alone as my fiancé had an emergency. I heard something scratching up and down the camper all night. I kept telling myself it was just branches. I've since been behind the camper. There are no trees, just grass. The next day, my fiancé was able to get here. We were walking out of the house that's about 25 yards or so from the camper, which is where our buddy lives. I heard my fiancé's extremely distinctive laugh from about 10 to 15 feet in front of me, behind a stack of old tires. It was so realistic that I caught myself trying to lean and peek around the tires. Then, I remembered the night before and the stories I'd heard about the property and reminded myself that I'm not that white and looked towards the camper. My fiancée was in there putting stuff away, so I gently hurried to the camper, being careful not to run and alert what was ducking with me to the fact that I knew it was ducking with me, and or trying to lure me to my death. I asked him if he'd been watching something or saw something funny or laughed at something, anything. Nope. He had been sitting in silence since arriving a few minutes before me, as I had to retrieve all the items he had forgotten. I explained what had happened, and we didn't really talk more about it. That is, until he heard our buddy's voice calling his name outside the window of the camper that night. Nobody was there, and he and his girlfriend both swore he never left the house. Then I took my opportunity for an "I told you so." He had believed me the whole time, however, he just didn't want to make a big deal out of it or get too excited. We've had a lot of minor stuff in the week since. Mostly knocks or footsteps on the roof. Fiancé thought he saw an arm out the window last night. We often feel a general sense of being watched whenever we leave the camper. That is, until tonight. Out of nowhere, something started knocking up and down the camper. It's a fifth wheel, so it would knock at the door, then the bathroom, and then the bedroom area, where we were settling in, and then back to the bathroom and then the door. It was at a semi-human speed, but just slightly too fast for the terrain outside. My fiancé insisted on looking out and saw nothing. He then insisted on retrieving my hunting knife from the car, along with something to better secure the door. It's an old camper, so the door is broken. We had been tying it shut, but it wasn't especially secure from the inside, just enough to keep our 3 cats from letting themselves out. Thankfully, he made it to the car and back okay, but he looked super sketched out when he came back in. I asked if he'd seen something, and he told me that he had heard something knocking further down the property, towards the house our buddy and his girlfriend live in. Then, he said, he'd heard branches crack high up and then knock further down. We tied the door much more securely with an old electrical cord. The camper had been used to store junk before us, and we secured our cats in cupboards and kennels and closed the partition between the living and dining area and the bathroom and bedroom area. We cranked the sound on the game we're playing, but we can still hear occasional knocking, sometimes just one, and most recently, a bunch in rapid succession. We aren't sure what it could be. We're in the rural Midwest near several reservations on land they most certainly would have occupied, specifically Ojibwa, if that helps. Our buddy suggested a Pequodji, but I don't know enough about them to be able to guess. I haven't heard of anything like this. Skinwalker encounter? A few weeks ago while horseback riding in Shawnee National Forest, I possibly had a run-in with a skinwalker. My friend and I planned to take an early morning trail ride through Shawnee from her campground. We set out around 8 a.m. on our horses, joined by her mom's German Shepherd mix. After a few hours and deep in the woods, we approached a sign for a new trail that was just put in, which was being talked about around camp as a difficult ride. Neither of us had been on it before, and we didn't want to push our older horses. The trail went up the hill and followed the bluff around to the other side and through the woods, while our trail followed the creek bank. We decided to pass after reading the word caution on the sign and continued around the hill to cross the creek. As we turned the corner of the hill while following the trail, I noticed that the dog with us had run ahead through some tall grass. I assumed he was running ahead to get in the creek. While crossing the creek, we hear an animal start wailing in pain. Initially, I believed it was our dog, but he emerged hopping through the grass while the animal continued to scream. It sounded like a dog who was in immense pain. The only thing that I compare the sound to is a dog having a stroke. I work at an animal shelter, so I'm around dogs a lot. We ride through this creek and realize that the screaming originates from up the hill, accessible only via the new trail. My friend starts calling out to see if there are other riders on the new trail. They may need help, as a dog shouldn't be that far out in the woods without one. No answer. We keep making our way through the creek, calling out and looking to see where the sound is coming from because it was very close at this point, just up the bluff from where we were. We couldn't see anything, and by this time we were on the other side of the creek, and we were about to turn and ride away from the hill. The screaming had continued this whole time. As soon as our backs turn, it stops. No more sound from the bluff at all. I didn't consider the possibilities until after the incident, and by then, we were really freaked out. After we reached our destination and were headed back the way we came, my friend asked if we could take the new trail back because if there was an animal up there, she just couldn't leave it. There was nothing. We called and whistled but didn't hear or see anything. I guess it could have been a coyote, but it was probably 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., which isn't normally the time of day they would be out. Thoughts? Experience in the mountains of Ireland. I once had the scariest experience of my life in the mountains of Ireland. Technically I'm from Northern Ireland, but I consider it Ireland. When I was 15, I took part in the Duke of Edinburgh program and went out for a weekend of hiking and camping in the rugged Mourne Mountains. I was staying at a campsite just outside Tollymore Forest Park. It was the last night of Duke of Ed, and it had been a long day of walking and hiking through terrain. We had pitched our tents a mile or so away from some bathrooms, and we decided to go and get ready to sleep. I was the last to use the bathrooms. They were old and under-maintained and had yellow lights. I was washing my hands when one of the hand dryers suddenly started. I was nowhere near it but assumed it had been activated by a bug or something. There were a lot of flies. I had finished washing my hands when the door to the bathroom started rattling. I just thought it was one of my friends telling me to hurry up, but when I opened the door nobody was there. I could see torch lights heading back to the campsite and was really pissed off, so I forgot about what just happened. Anyway, I was walking back towards the campsite, and I suddenly got the feeling of being watched. It was like all of my hairs stood up, and I went cold. I was low-key freaking out, so I started running back to camp. I stopped because I heard a light. A whine in the nearby woods. I told myself it was just an animal and kept going. My friends were waiting for me at the gate of the campsite, so we all walked the last bit of the trail together. We immediately noticed that it looked like someone had been at our tents. Bags were open, tents unzipped, etc. We were genuinely scared shitless. We were a bunch of 15-year-olds without phones, with no way of contact, and assumed that someone was nearby. So what do? We light a campfire and roast marshmallows. Things kept getting weirder. The campfire kept dying quickly, stray flames, etc. We ignored all the warning signs. At about midnight we finally headed to bed. We buddied up because we were still a bit scared. What happened that night was the scariest of all. I got woken up at what must have been 2ish by the sound of my friend talking outside my tent. The only thing is, my friend was sleeping beside me. I was really freaked out. I woke up my friend, but it was done, and the voice stopped. Now if you know what was going on that night, it was all just so unsettling. Now rationally I'm thinking there was wind, dodgy facilities, and extreme fatigue from hiking, but if anyone has had similar experiences in the morns, let me know. Can anyone explain to me what I have witnessed several times? I live in an extremely rural area of western Pennsylvania, right in between Pittsburgh and Erie. My grandparents live with me now because they're old, and we have a furnished porch where we watch TV. The porch faces the woods on the side of our house, which is very large. However, there is a giant hill as soon as the tree line starts, almost at a 90-degree angle. This started a couple of years ago. My grandma and I were watching Game of Thrones, and I noticed a blinking light in the woods. It appears to be deep in the woods and at eye level with me, but it couldn't be deep within the woods and at eye level with me because, as I stated, there's a giant hill as soon as you get into the woods. The light reminds me of a holiday LED light. It very slowly blinks from blue to red to green, but it's much brighter than a normal LED light, and when I am not looking at it straight on, it just appears as a dim glow illuminating a section of the woods. It genuinely freaked my grandma out. We watched it for several minutes and it disappeared. I saw it once more after this a few weeks later and then never again until recently. I saw it again about a month ago and then again last night, and this time, all three of us watched it for about 10 to 15 minutes. Does anyone have any clue what it could be, or have you experienced anything similar? Also, I know there are going to be people asking why I didn't investigate. It's easy to think you will investigate when things like this happen, but to actually do it is another story. It's just a light, but it really ducking freaks me out every time, and my grandma says the same. She was tearing up the first time it happened because she was so scared. I've been being stalked by a thing at my dad's caravan, and I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm not going to sugarcoat this story at all. I've been feeling like I'm going mad from the things I saw and experienced. It starts when I went to my dad's caravan out in the middle of nowhere. He works at a factory nearby and leaves for work at 5:30 in the morning. I woke up at around 8 a.m. and got ready to do some work in the yard. I wanted to have a smoke and some coffee before I got on with it. So I was sitting on the bench outside smoking a cigarette. I have a portable caravan in the back of the yard that I own. I often sleep in it, and behind it is a small space where you could stand. It's small, as the fence surrounding our property makes a corner behind it. Anyway, I began to roll up a joint. I know, not very efficient for work, but whatever, and I was alone, as my dad was at work and shouldn't be back until 5 p.m. It was maybe 9 a.m. now? I don't really remember, and as I was rolling my joint, I heard my dad calling to me from behind my van. He just kept yelling out, "Op, get over here. And I need you quick." I stopped rolling and set my shit aside. I instantly felt something wasn't right. So I called my dad, and he answered. Here's how the convo went. "Hey Dad, are you at home?" "No, why?" That was all the confirmation I needed. I made up some bullshit excuse and hung up. I heard him call me over again. and I swear I had the biggest heart drop of my life. I was genuinely terrified. It was then I could see the shadow of something standing behind the van. I quickly got my weed and rolling tray and hauled back inside. I locked the door and didn't dare go back outside until midday. This isn't the only weird experience I've had. I've never felt so terrified in my life. The woods my dad lives next to are absolutely massive and have no trails, just pure wildness embodied in forest form. I'm really sharing this because to this day I still feel like I'm crazy. I attempted to explain my experience to my father and others, but they all regard me as if I were irrational. However, I am certain of what I heard and witnessed. I still think about this every day even though it happened in the summer of last year. Has anyone else experienced this before? I live in the United Kingdom, by the way. Scariest experience ever for me. This happened during COVID, sometime in March 2021. I was 12, and with schools closed, my mom had sent me to stay with my cousin's family in their rural village. At least there I'd have something to do. My uncle owned a small pickup truck and made deliveries for a living. He'd often take me along, as I was useful for loading and unloading lighter items, and he said it was good for me to learn the area. Most nights we'd be back by 9 or 10, but that particular evening, a delivery ran late. We started the return journey around 11 p.m. The roads were empty. In rural areas like that, everyone slept early, and by that hour the villages became dark and silent. We drove through a road where dense forests were on both sides. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. We should have reached the next village by then, but the forest just kept going. My uncle was visibly anxious. I could see the tension in him. He didn't say anything, not to scare me perhaps, but we both knew this road had never been this long before. Then we saw something. Thick fog was rolling across the road ahead, unusually dense for that time of year. That's the last thing I remember. I woke to the cold of water seeping into my shoes. My head felt heavy, confused. Beside me, my uncle stirred and fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The torch revealed something that still sends chills down my spine. We were sitting in the truck in the middle of a river. The water was shallow, as it was still spring, and it rose just past our ankles. My uncle pushed open his door. We climbed out, shivering, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. When we looked back, our blood ran cold. Behind us, maybe 50 feet up, was the edge of a cliff. Somehow, we had gone over it. The truck should have been destroyed. We should have been dead. But there wasn't a scratch on either of us. Not a single injury. Literally nothing happened to us. My uncle tried his phone, and there was no signal. He checked the time, it was around 3 a.m. We'd lost over 4 hours. With no other choice, we started walking upstream, against the current. Eventually, we saw lights and stumbled into a small cluster of houses. We knocked on one of the houses. A family took us in for the night, asking no questions when they saw the state we were in. In the morning, my uncle called my dad and our other uncles. They came with a group of men and a tow vehicle. When we returned to the river in daylight, we found the truck exactly where we'd left it, completely undamaged, resting in the shallow water as if it had been gently placed there. It took about 10 to 15 men to haul it out. As we were leaving, one of the village elders approached my uncle. He glanced at the direction we'd walked the night before, then at us. "Good thing you went upstream," he said. "If you'd followed the water the other way, you would have ended up at an old cemetery and a hospital morgue." I still don't know what happened that night. But I'm grateful that I'm still alive, and this was 100% the scariest experience I had. A group of friends and I did a 4-day hike through Robber's Roost in southern Utah. It is an area known for being extremely desolate. This was a hard hike. You had to rappel into slot canyons to get to this area. We were about 20 plus miles into the hike and in the middle of nowhere. A middle-aged guy covered in tattoos that spoke almost no English popped out from behind a sand dune. He asked us for water. We offered to help him get out of the area since there is no civilization near that place. He refused. Not necessarily super creepy because I don't think he meant us any harm, but there is no good answer to why somebody is out in the middle of literally nowhere without any gear or water and refuses help when offered. Strange encounter in the Appalachian Mountains in Ellijay, Georgia. So this happened about a year ago when I had recently picked up hunting from a good friend of mine. My father had bought a cabin very secluded in the woods about an hour from any town. It was about 15 acres with 2 cabins and was located down a long gravel road off of another long rural road, so very secluded and quiet. At the time, I was 20 years old and eager to spend time in the woods, as my family had always lived in cities. My friend, who I previously mentioned as the one who introduced me to hunting, came to visit and assist me in preparing for deer season. He arrived at the house, and we spent the day together, taking some time to relax. The next day we got up pretty early and went out to Walmart to get some supplies. We bought a 2-man deer blind, some corn feed, some trail cams, and some ammo. We returned to the house around 7 a.m. and pack our bags to set up at the spot. Like I mentioned previously, my dad lives on about 15 acres in the Appalachian Mountains that quite literally borders the national forest. Anyway, we hiked up the ridge for what felt like 3 miles until we made it to the peak. My friend said that this would be a good spot to put the blind because we could see down both sides of the ridge and see the top pretty clearly. We got everything set up and put the corn out and finished it all around 10:30 a.m. We both agreed that we'd go back down to the house to grab some food and maybe go to town for a few hours. Not even 5 minutes after we started walking back down the mountain, we heard what sounded like a huge tree branch falling from a height of about 50 feet. We both stopped and looked behind us to see if we could spot anything, as the sound seemed to come from about 30 yards behind us, near the area where we had just been setting up. We stayed still for about a minute before my buddy cracked a joke about a pretty hefty squirrel taking a tumble. Fast forward about a month when deer season is just getting started. I had gone back to my dad's house for opening day. He was on a business trip in Dallas, Texas, and my buddy was in Florida visiting his grandparents, so it was just me, which I was totally fine with because I mostly like to be alone. So my plan is to get up at about 6 a.m. since the sun doesn't come up until about 7:30 to 7:45. It gives me enough time to get up the ridge and get situated. Anyway, I get suited up and throw my bag on and grab my Henry 30-30 lever-action rifle. Dad wanted me to get the first deer on the property with his cowboy gun. I got up the ridge at around 6:45, so there was still another hour left of darkness. The forest was dead quiet. I had noticed that when I first walked into the woods, it was not the usual crickets and insects chirping. It almost felt like I was in a soundproof box, and the crunching of the leaves and sticks that I was stepping on was like gunshots. I didn't think too much of it because it was early morning and not midnight, so I thought it was probably normal up here. About another 10 minutes go by as I'm in the blind, and I hear what literally sounds like a full-grown bear howling/screaming in pain like he just lost a limb. My heart dropped instantly, and I held my breath to be as quiet as possible. I'm not stupid or a believer in anything paranormal or cryptid, let's get that straight here. So my initial thought is bear. I don't hear any walking or noises for another 2 minutes of being quiet, so it slips my mind and I go back to waiting around. Probably 15 to 20 minutes before sunrise I hear something big, buck-sized, walking around maybe 60 yards behind me. Adrenaline hits because I think I'm about to get a good one on opening day. I try to turn around as quietly as I possibly can to get eyes on this bad boy. As soon as I get about 120 degrees around, I see something standing up on its hind legs in the corner of my eye. I pause and try to be still, but I'm curious about what I think I'm seeing, immediately fearing that I might have to shoot an agitated black bear. So I decide I'm going to get ready to shoot this thing if I have to, so I complete the full turn while moving my barrel up. I swear as soon as I laid eyes on that ducking monster, it screamed just like I had heard earlier on, and every ducking hair and pore on my body stood up, and I was frozen in fear, trying to make out what I was looking at with what little light there was out. This ducking thing finished that scream, which felt like an eternity, and then turned around and literally ran down the hill. Yes, ran. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like every step I took was equivalent to jumping 5 feet forward. It is humanly impossible for a lunge to be that long. And no, before you ask, it did not run away on 4 legs. That mother ducker was sprinting on 2 legs like a ducking man. I sat in that blind for the next 3 hours, frozen, trying to muster up the courage to get out of the blind and make the hike back down to the house. Eventually I made it back down to the cabin, and of course nothing happened to me. I called my dad as soon as I arrived at the cabin to tell him about what I had just witnessed, and to this day, he still doesn't believe me. I have not gone up to that ridge to this day. I refuse to go up there to retrieve the blind and the cameras. I was looking on Apple Maps, and about 5 miles to the east is an Indian memorial/burial ground. Not sure if you guys know anything about these things or about the Appalachian Mountains or have had any similar experiences. Today I try and tell myself that it was just a big bear with rabies or some sort of infection/disease. Shadow figure in the woods. Don't think I'm crazy, but while I was out hunting last year, I saw the shadow of a person step out across one of my hunting lanes while I was sitting with the sun rising behind me in a natural brush blind. They took 4 steps out, and I thought it was a poacher. I leaned forward in my seat to stand and yell at them for being on my property, but before I got to my feet, it turned and ran up the hill so fast that for a long time I tried to convince myself it was a deer that I was seeing because there is no way a person could run that fast, but no matter how many times I recount the event in my mind, I can never actually believe the lie I'm trying to make myself believe. I don't do drugs. I've been in the woods all my life, and I've never once seen or heard anything resembling the supernatural, but I know I did that morning because the sun was good and up, plus I saw a deer 5 minutes later, and it was clear as day. Can anyone explain to me what I saw? I'll never go back to that camp. When I was 13, I went to a summer camp I had been attending for years called Victory Ranch. I had never had a problem there before. But my grandma had just passed, and in a way, her death had opened my third eye. Victory Ranch is a Baptist Christian camp, so every day was filled with chapel time, worship songs, and Bible verse memorizing. Camp started normally. The camp usually had boys and girls cabins on separate sides of the land. The boys are by the mess hall, and the girls are across the creek in these little condos. There were 2 mini houses smack in the middle of camp used for storage. But this year more kids meant one of them was open for an additional girls' cabin. The cabins all had names. The boys' rooms were numbered, and the girls were named after plants and flowers. But this new cabin had a different name. It was called Maverick. I got put in Maverick. The house layout was strange. Shower curtains separating rooms. 1 bath and shower for 9 girls. The first day went smoothly, and I was wrapped up in the nostalgia. But then it got dark. We normally had nighttime games, but our rec director said they were canceled that year. I felt bummed about it, but I was super tired, so my friend Annie and I headed back to our cabin. I crawled into bed and fell asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a flashing light in the room. Annie had smuggled her BlackBerry to camp, and it was flashing an unnaturally bright white light. I got up to turn it off, but it was already off. How was it flashing? I woke up Annie to tell her the phone was going nuts. Then I saw it. My bed was up against the window. I had the bottom bunk, Annie had the top. The curtains were opening as if on a drawstring over and over again. I shook Annie awake. "Stop it. You are scaring me." She woke up. "Stop what?" "The curtains." "I'm not doing that." She was wide awake and out of bed in seconds. We stood there in horror as the curtains kept opening and closing. I felt things moving in the dark around me. Shadows writhing. We ran and woke our counselor, who told us to go back to bed. We obeyed and spent the rest of the night crying silently, trying to ignore the curtains and the strange shadows all around us. The next day we looked like zombies. We were exhausted and freaked out. We had no fun that day, and when nightfall came back around, we tried to talk to our counselor again, who brushed us off again. That night was worse than the night before. The curtains were faster and would stay open longer. Each time I stared out the window, sure, I felt something staring back. It felt as if eyes were burning into me from the trees by the creek. The next day, stuff started happening during the daylight. Our stuff would go missing, and we had awful headaches inside the house. Things went on like this for 2 more days. We were getting desperate. We talked to the pastor, who basically told us we were imagining things. We were furious and exhausted. We had to go back to the cabin for something but brought another friend since we were too scared to go just by ourselves. She complained of an awful headache as soon as she went inside. We hadn't told her about our head pain. Night fell and we went to bed. That night it was like the intensity had been turned up to 10. After enough curtain opening, I remembered something my mom had told me. I was not Baptist, nor was my mom. She believed in demons and told me that I could use the name of Jesus to command demons to go away. I started praying as hard as I could and had Annie pray with me. After about 40 minutes of this it stopped. The curtains, everything. We passed out and slept like babies. The next day everything felt fine. I was so happy it had worked. We came back to the cabin for something around noon or so. When Annie suddenly lost consciousness, fell, and hit her head on the bunk ladder. When she came to, she was so out of it I carried her to the nurse. The nurse did nothing and said she was fine. She wasn't fine. What was wrong with everyone? In the mess hall, Annie passed out on her food in front of the nurse, who did nothing. That was the last straw. I called my mom in hysterics from another counselor's phone. My mom was shocked. I had always had so much fun at camp, but I begged her to take me home. But after talking for a bit I told her I would stay. I was going home the next day anyway, and I didn't trust the nurse to keep Annie safe. Night fell for the last time, and the activity was back with a vengeance. The curtains are flying around. Our bed was shaking, both of us could barely breathe. We sobbed through the night and at dawn packed up as fast as we could. We walked past the back of the cabin on our way to the chapel when I saw it. A brown, partly decomposing hand opened that curtain one last time. And 2 yellow eyes peered out at us. My blood went cold. I couldn't break eye contact with it. It was staring right through me. It looked at me with a hungry expression, as if it were planning exactly how to end me. Annie saw it too. We ducking ran to the buses in tears as fast as our awkward adolescent legs would take us and never looked back. I never went back. And Annie and I don't talk anymore. I don't talk to any of those people anymore. I have tried many things to rid myself of that darkness since. Nothing has worked. I walked away from my faith, and I'm a practicing pagan now. It's what's helping at the moment. The paranormal is just a normal part of my life now. Many more paranormal things have happened since, but none have scared me as bad as this camp trip. I want to know what the thing I saw was. Was it a demon or a monster, a spirit of some kind? I still see its razor-sharp, teeth-filled grin when I close my eyes. It's been 8 years, and there is still a part of me that's scared of sharing this story. I have tried to share this story before, but I was afraid it would invite that energy back into my life. However, I now feel the need for answers. If anyone has any idea what I saw at Camp Victory Ranch, please let me know. Loud vibrational noise in Pisgah Forest. A while back, my girlfriend, another couple, and I spent a day on the beach along the Davidson River and had a very odd experience. We had discovered this location the previous day, and 3 of us spent the day relaxing. One friend ventured upriver approximately 500 yards around the bend and returned, reporting that he had heard an unusual noise. We disregarded and continued the day, leaving without incident. Upon returning the next day, it was surprisingly crowded. At about 3 p.m. the place empties, and we are alone until maybe 5 p.m. We all begin to pack the car, that's maybe 50 yards away, and my friend, who heard the noise, and I returned to the beach for the last 2 items. We had been unsuccessfully skipping rocks all day and decided to throw a couple more before leaving. We throw like 2, and all of a sudden, a friend skips it easily, like 40 yards, 50 times, and before we can even react, an extremely loud vibrational noise that I could only compare to the buzzing of, like, a guitar amp that's not fully plugged in starts. It was so loud that it felt like a helicopter was about to fly over us on the riverbank. When it seemed like the noise was about to become visible to us, it continued moving and appeared to go over the car and up towards a mountain. The noise abruptly stops, and we both look at each other like, what in the actual duck was that? He looks at me and goes, that was weird, but it's going to be even weirder if the girls didn't hear it. We returned to the car, where both girls were waiting, visibly upset and asking what had taken us so long, unaware that we had heard anything unusual. We asked them how long they thought we had been gone for. They said no less than 45 minutes. I would say we were gone for no more than 5 to 7 minutes at the most. I've spent over 40 days at this river spot and have never had anything else happen or heard of anyone experiencing something similar. Unexplained feeling of being hunted in the forest. I'm unsure if my story fits within this community, but it feels like it does. A little bit of context: from before I was even born, my family owned a small piece of land in a gated community in the countryside. Nothing fancy, just a small house, a shed, and a relatively big backyard. It was only 1.5 hours away from the city we all live in and was mainly used in summer for vacations and taking some rest from the big city. The house was built by my grandparents a long time ago, but it survived pretty well through all the years. The most important part is that our land was right on the edge of a forest. Between the house and the forest, we had a fence, followed by a small dirt road, and then another fence that surrounded the entire community. Every summer break from my birth until I turned 16, I spent time at that house with my grandma. I was brought there for the first time when I was less than a year old. However, about 7 years ago, we sold that property and moved to a new location that was significantly better. The strange part that I haven't figured out yet is as follows. From my first memories of that place, I had an unexplainable fear of that particular forest, which could be seen from the house. It only manifested at night, yet to this day, I cannot forget the sensation. As a toddler, I was so scared that I avoided getting anywhere near a window, especially if it had no curtains. As I got older, that feeling didn't go away, like most other childhood fears. When I had to get outside the house at night, I experienced that horrible sinking feeling and a wave of overwhelming dread. I felt that something was always watching me from the forest. That exact feeling when you know somebody is looking but have no proof. And it somehow affected only me. No one from my family had ever experienced something like that. What makes it really strange is that as a kid, I explored everything in around a 13-mile radius from the house. I knew all the woods, trails, ponds, etc. so well that I could walk anywhere with my eyes closed, just by memory. It included that specific patch of forest, which caused me dread every night. Apparently, there was really nothing special there, apart from an old, abandoned, and almost dried up pond and a small hill from trash buried underground. It is really not so clean in the forest out there. I examined the old maps, predating the land's development, and found that the forest, which was much larger, was the only feature present. I tried researching any events that occurred in the area, but I found nothing. I remember, when my grandma was still alive, she told me that there was a place called the Fool's Glade. In my language it's literally called Glade where the fools are, in that forest, but I never actually found it. She told me that when big storms hit, they would actually move in circles around the glade. And indeed, when heavy thunderstorms came every year, they somehow circled around that exact forest. It would be raining for a couple of hours, then stop as the clouds moved away, and then it would rain again as the same clouds circled all the way back. Multiple times, usually 5 to 11 full circles. I think there is some scientific explanation for this, but I haven't found it yet. Additionally, my grandmother used to recount stories about how the ball lightning struck our fence on several occasions. If I remember correctly, the lightning sphere would appear from the forest, then circle our house a couple of times, and after that, it would fly right into the fence, causing the tops of metal poles to glow and emit multiple electrical discharges. Those stories are definitely true, because other family members confirmed them. I understand that it is an intriguing story to share with children, but there is no reason for family members to fabricate something like this to me as an adult. Also, I need to mention that I'm not scared of the dark or generally the forest at night. I've been on multiple long hikes, sleeping in my tent in the middle of nowhere. I'm used to nighttime forests and animals, but I wouldn't go near that one if it gets dark. Just thinking and recalling memories about it gives me chills right now. I'm no skeptic, it's just because I believe in science. I came here because I believe that some things defy reasonable explanation. The feeling of existential dread and being watched, more like hunted, was etched into me so prominently I couldn't get rid of it, even though many years had passed. So, what is this feeling and why? Is there anybody who had similar experiences? For me it was camping with a couple of friends in my early 20s in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We gathered around a campfire, enjoying each other's company on a pleasant evening, but we remained close to the fire as it effectively deterred insects. I continued to perceive something in the distance, but due to the darkness, I assumed it was merely a tree stump or something similar. It was not moving, yet it did exhibit a vaguely human shape. I also kept thinking I'm probably trying to make it seem human, similar to how people see faces in things that aren't there. But there was this nagging feeling that we weren't completely alone, and technically we were probably trespassing. Anyway, I didn't mention it to any of my friends because I didn't want to seem like the scaredy cat wimp of the bunch. But when everyone finally went to sleep around 1 or 2, I still felt like we weren't fully alone, and that area off in the distance by the creepy tree was still giving me the heebie-jeebies. The next day, when everyone was getting up, I went over to the area now that there was daylight. The tree wasn't there. There was nothing that could have been construed as vaguely human in form, like what I had seen. And worse yet, there were shoe imprints in that area. None of us had walked over there, and the shoe print stopped in the clearing, so they didn't come further towards our campsite but just stopped right where I saw the creepy tree. I'm convinced someone was just standing there, still, watching us. Why, I have no idea. But I told everyone about it later once we had packed up and left because I would rather not say it out loud and make it feel even more real. Definitely never camp there again. Strange story. I am 33 years old, and I come from Northern Europe. Not its Scandinavian part, though. It's a former Soviet Union, actually, but it's still a northern country, where forests are big and dark and winters are long and cold, but natives are rather pagan than good Christians. Back in time I used to love this country, yet now I'm living far away from it, and I'll never go back. My reasons are my own. I was 21 and had a girlfriend 3 years younger than me. We had no place to live and were really happy to accept her grandma's offer to settle with her. It was an old house in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest and fields of grass. It was 17 kilometers to the town, 15 kilometers to the highway, and no public transport was available. Twice in the week a relative came with a car. She brought us food and cigarettes. We had a dozen chickens living in the barn and a garden where we tried to grow some vegetables. Such a remote place it was. There was a huge oak tree nearby with 6 very primitive handmade ragdolls hanging from its branches. My girlfriend put them there a time ago. When I asked her, why? She said, it's a strange place. I just had to mark it somehow. In my country, we have a tradition of a summer solstice festival, when people gather together, start a lot of bonfires, drink beer, and have fun until sunrise. It's usually a shame not to participate in it. So, well, that year 2 of my girlfriend's childhood friends came to visit us. I even remember their names, Mona and Eve. We made a bonfire and had a really good time until darkness fell and the moon came out. The moon was full and red. There was something creepy about it. One of the girls said, let's go to the river. And as we had no better things to do, we decided to go. To get to the river, we had to follow the road through the forest and then turn towards the Valley of Oaks. It took us about 35 to 40 minutes to walk there, even though we didn't have any flashlights. It wasn't very dark due to the moonlight, but this time it was extremely noisy. To the left and to the right of the forest path, a huge number of birds were screaming like crazy. I remember I said, "What's wrong with them? Are they always like that?" And my girlfriend said, "No." Then, a couple of hours later when we went back, the forest was silent. I noticed that something was not right, and then my girlfriend caught my arm like she was scared and whispered in my ear, "Do you hear it?" I didn't hear anything. Her friends asked what was up, and she screamed, "Don't you hear it? Don't you hear it at all? There's someone singing behind the trees." Female. They didn't hear it, as well. We stood still in the forest of silence, beneath the red moon, and we heard nothing. Then I put her hands away from me and went to these trees she was pointing to, step by step, slowly. After a very few steps I heard something, as well. It wasn't a human voice, though, just like a distant radio transmission or white noise, nothing more than that. I asked, "What's behind this growth?" She said, "Swamp." Then I asked, "Is she still singing?" She said, "No." We went home and tried to forget about this. Yet the problem was I couldn't forget. I asked Grandma if there is something in this part of the forest, any buildings maybe. Grandma said a couple of houses were built right after the war but were abandoned later. I asked why. Is there something spooky about this place or what? She said, "No well-paid job around here, that's all." I found the remains of these houses a bit later, just several broken walls. Nothing that special, except for two strange black hooks attached to one of the walls. Both looked quite new. I still wonder what their purpose was. We have never wandered this forest path after dusk since then. But it didn't help much. It was autumn, and we went there to get some wood. We had a dog with us. Running around like a fool normally, this time he was quite cautious. I watched him for a while and realized he was scared of something. Yet he had quite a cowardly nature, and I dismissed his behavior at first. Until my girlfriend said, "You know, it's the same place. Remember?" She said, "It's like he sees more than we do. Perhaps we aren't alone?" The trees were still. No wind, nothing. And not out loud, but deep inside my mind I told it, "Whoever you are, behold and appear." I've still no idea why I did that. But it's been done. And it answered. Unseen. I just heard massive hard steps approaching us, like an enormous elephant or two. I ran aside. Steps continued to proceed until it stopped in the middle of the path. I didn't know what to think anymore. My girlfriend caught my arm, and we ran away. Out of the forest, she asked me, "What did you do?" I told her. It scared the shit out of her for real. She hit me in the face and screamed, "Don't do it. Don't do it anymore." I made a promise. And I kept it. There's not much left to tell. Winter passed, and in an early month of spring, we sat on the barn roof and talked about nothing and everything. Suddenly she said, "Remember this thing in the forest? I want to tell you something, just don't call me crazy." Well, how could I? Wasn't I crazy to command this thing telepathically, as well? Below is the story she told me. She was 13 or 14, she spent a part of her summer vacations with Grandma, and that evening she was sitting beside the road, waiting for her dad to come with a visit. But he didn't come that evening at all. Instead, a bus stopped down the road in the dusk. The door opened, and a bunch of little kids came out. There was a woman with them. There was something strange about these kids, simply because they didn't behave like kids of their age. They were too calm, too apathetic, they moved as if they were programmed. They had no bags with them, either. Hand by hand in a straight procession, they went towards the forest and didn't come back. She waited for them to come back, but they didn't. Darkness fell. The bus driver turned off the lights. She told me, "There's not an inhabited place in that direction for many kilometers. Nobody walks here, except hunters. There's nowhere to stay and nothing to look for. There's only that place. We are not together anymore, but I will always remember, because, well, if you ask about the weirdest stuff that ever happened to me, this is the one." And, yes, it's a true story. Something chased us out of the woods. Last year, I moved house and just happened to move next to a forest. Since moving in, my brother and his girlfriend have heard voices and footsteps late at night when we've been in the car park. I've also heard my name called a few times in these woods when I was with friends and no one else was around. I'm not sure how to explain this, so I'll just get into it. It recently came to our attention that in these woods, there is a witch's elm tree that is estimated to be a couple hundred years old. I decided to check it out on my own a few days ago, as the UK had a bit of a small heat wave, and I had nothing else to do. To get to the tree you have to walk down some steps. As I approached the steps, I had the distinct impression that I was being observed. Nevertheless, I continued onward and ultimately reached the tree. Something about it felt off, but nothing too major. I stuck around for about 5 minutes, then left and walked through the woods and sat down on a fallen log, waiting for my brother to finish work, as he was going to come and check it out. While I was sitting down on the phone to him, I heard a really aggressive growling sound coming from behind me. I looked behind me but couldn't see anything, so I dismissed the sound, thinking it might have been a dog in a nearby back garden since the pathway runs along the back fences of some houses. About 40 minutes later my brother arrives, and we walk down to the tree, and we both feel completely fine. We were waiting for his girlfriend, so we ended up going home. We had to run a few errands, and we got back to the woods about 8 p.m., when the sun was setting. We parked up and started walking down to the tree. Halfway along the path, we heard screaming, which is normal for these woods, but it did make us feel on edge. We arrive at the tree again, and something just feels off, like we're all being watched. I wanted to walk over to the tree, but a voice in my head was telling me not to, so I didn't. All of a sudden my brother's girlfriend said she heard growling. We both turn around to look at her as she's explaining what she heard. Suddenly, something massive started running towards us in the grass, but it sounded way too fast to be a deer, fox, or human. We obviously ran because duck that. We ascend the path a bit, and all three of us sense that someone is following us. We get back to my brother's car. His girlfriend was in the passenger seat, while I sat alone in the back seat. It felt as though someone was sitting next to me, but there was no one there. We get back to the house and pull over, and they both say they felt something else in the car. Does anyone have an explanation or any ideas about what followed us? My mom heard something. In the woods near her church. This is a relatively short story, and it's my mom's. For context, my mom and I grew up in Puerto Rico near the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I mean if you go on maps and try to find our town, it would be smack in the middle of the island, miles from anything else. Just steep, unexplored valleys for miles and miles. When my mom was about 5 or 6, she went to this very old church that doesn't exist anymore, and it was a very old church with an outhouse near the woods next to the church. My mom said she once went out there, and in that outhouse there's a small window right above it. Why? I don't know. She said she heard something. It's been years, so she can't exactly remember what it said or what it sounded like, but she's very sure of one thing: it said her name. After that, she ran straight into the church. She never went back, but she said while she was running, she heard footsteps behind her that stopped when she got near the church. Went on a little off-road drive in the night, and the vibes were not it. A very strange presence was spotted. Just for some context, I'm from Costa Rica. As some of you may know, this country is tiny. You can drive cross-country in 7 to 8 hours, so most things are really close, and going out for a drive in the mountains or any small adventure will take at most a couple of hours. I was super bored this past Monday, and going for a drive and doing some off-roading seemed like a nice way to spend the night, so a couple of friends and I drove to the mountains, specifically to a place called Finca 1 in San Rafael in the Heredia province. This place is basically a huge 4x4 park, so if you want to play in the mud, it is the ideal place. The only thing is that it is deep into the mountains, and there is nothing around. Close to the place there are some touristy areas, wildlife reserves and private terrains, but during the night it is very desolate. When we arrived, the vibes already felt off. The first strange sighting was a light in the distance. We were not sure if it was a motorcycle, maybe a guard of the property nearby, or a guy on a bike, which would make sense, and you'll know in a minute why. Once we had completed some trails and played for a while with our cars, we were getting ready to leave, and the second weird thing happened. Some guy in another off-road car went like crazy fast next to us, but he didn't seem to be interested in entering the 4x4 place or interested in joining our group. This wasn't that weird, but it definitely felt off. Like there's no need at all to go that fast and reckless on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. The third and weirdest thing that happened was when we were already out of the place and starting to get ready to leave when, out of nowhere, some guy on a bicycle emerged from the forest. It is not weird for two people to go out there alone, but at 11 p.m. on a Monday, it was a weird sighting. To make things worse, I noticed this guy was walking out of the forest clean and dry. Mind you, all the attractiveness of this place is that you get to play in the mud and do some off-road and MTB trails. He did have lights and protective gear but felt like he generated them out of the blue. As weird as this was, my friends and I took this as a signal to leave and go home. Until now, I had not considered any of this to be paranormal. But what convinced me and made me believe we really did have a paranormal experience was that we never spotted a guy on a bike on our way out. There's only one way in and one way out of the place, and to make things worse, there's only one big road that goes from the mountains to the nearest town. And the chances of a guy on a bike being faster than a car are something I don't think are possible. Even going downhill, the road still has a lot of curves and sharp turns. Orange eyes in a dark forest in the UK mountains. So my friend and I were walking home late at night. About 20 minutes before we got close to the forest, I said it felt like someone was watching us. He said he felt the same way, describing it as similar to the feeling you get when you're getting on a bus and people are looking at you. We both had the same feeling. For about 20 minutes when we were passing the forest, we kept hearing loud noises, and one of them sounded like something hitting a tree very hard and fast, with branches moving about. 2 minutes later, we saw orange eyes staring at us, and we kept walking like normal, not thinking it was anything until we looked away and looked back, and they were moving in the forest. Then we ran so fast and said to each other, "Did you see that too?" We ran up the road around a bend, and then there were two old people walking their dog up and down past us a few times, shining a very bright light in our faces the whole time. We waited for them to leave in their car and then walked away. We haven't talked about the weird thing in the forest since. Creepy camping experience. My husband, 33, and I, 34, are avid campers. Rain or shine, snow or ice, we go camping year-round all across Ontario. For the most part, it's always an incredibly relaxing and fun time. We do have our favorite parks, but we always look to explore new ones. A few years ago we heard about a little campground a few hours north of where we live and decided to check it out over the Labor Day weekend and into the following week. Personally, I believe Labor Day weekend is the best time to go because, if you can take the time off, the parks are typically busy during the actual weekend, but they completely empty out on the Monday and Tuesday as families return to work and school. Another advantage is that, generally, the farther the park is from the city, the less busy it tends to be, as people who live in urban areas typically do not drive that far for a short stay, at least based on our experience. So we get to the park, not only is it beautiful, but, as we suspected, it was quite empty. There were only a couple of other families there on the first day we arrived. Sadly, the weather was bad on the first night, and after a night of rain, we saw the other campers packing up and leaving. We went for a walk and very quickly noticed we had the entire place to ourselves. Legit, it was empty aside from us. For the next couple of nights we just did our normal activities of exploring, cooking great food, playing board games, etc. On what turned out to be our last night, the rain came back and was really heavy. We decided to stick it out and just hang around our site. As it got later, I couldn't shake an eerie feeling, but I brushed it off because it was dark and rainy, we were alone, and a thunderstorm was approaching. After dinner we decided we'd head to bed early. We cleaned up our dishes, put away our food and retired to our tent. The reason I say this is to highlight that all food and dishes were put away to avoid attracting animals. By that time the thunder was really loud and lightning had started. Despite all the weather, we somehow were able to fall asleep. I'm not sure at what time, but at some point I ended up waking up in the middle of the night. The thunder was dying down, but the lightning was so close/intense that every time it flashed, it would light up our site, and I could see shadows of the trees, picnic table, etc., outside through the tent. I recall lying there for a few moments, observing, and then I turned to my husband, who was sleeping soundly and completely undisturbed, beside me. After a few moments, the eerie feeling returned with overwhelming intensity. I started getting super spooked but realized I couldn't really move. As I was starting to internally panic, that was when not only did I hear, but I also saw something moving around outside the tent. At first, I couldn't believe it, but as the lightning continued to illuminate the area, I was 100% certain that there was a large bipedal figure moving around outside our tent and on the site. I couldn't move, all I could do was watch as it crept closer and closer to our tent door. From what I could see in the shadows, it appeared to be a humanoid figure that was much taller than a person and had a larger head. Terrified, I could only watch as this creature, whatever it was, began to enter our tent. But it didn't open the tent, rather, it just came through it. At that point I must have blacked out due to fear because when I woke up, it was the morning and my husband was cooking food. To say I was freaked out was an understatement. We had probably camped at least 50 times by this point and had never experienced anything like that before. I told my husband, and he kind of brushed it off pretty quickly, saying I most likely just had a bad dream. Now I do get sleep paralysis, so I thought maybe, but I had never experienced it that vividly before. It was so incredibly real, and the fact that I could move around at first was very different from any experience I had had in the past, i.e., I'd essentially wake up paralyzed. Anyways, I was extremely freaked out and couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, so he started packing up, and we decided to leave that day. A few months later I randomly brought up this story to him. As I was explaining what I experienced, he then confessed to me that he had lied to me that morning. According to him, that night he also woke up at some point and saw a person-like figure creeping around outside. He assumed he was just having a bad dream. He too felt uneasy in the morning, but he didn't want to say anything to me, as he didn't want to freak me out. He told me when I then got up, and I shared I saw it too, it validated to him he wasn't just dreaming. We didn't check the site for footprints, as we both thought it was a bad dream, but the heavy rain would have obscured any evidence. We still go camping, lol, but that was one of the 2 scariest experiences we've ever had in an Ontario park. We've talked about it since and have no idea what it was. Was there a person lurking around? Was it something paranormal? Did we both just have the same shared sleep paralysis episode? When I think back to the visual of this being, it almost seemed unearthly, perhaps even alien. Especially how it just seemed to glide through and into our tent. No idea, but I thought I would share this to hear others' thoughts or similar experiences. Okay. It still gives me the chills. I built a trailer with a back door that flips up. We slept with the door open, with only a screen between us and the outside. I awoke around 2 a.m., pitch black, and I had to go pee. I saw something float by that was human-sized and blacker than the dark night. No sound, nada. At the same moment, my dog, which barks at anything, growled. It was a sheepish growl, as if she were fearful. I still had to pee, so I decided to get out and go. I thought my eyes played a trick on me. Little did I know, my wife was also awake besides me. When I went to move, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Don't go out there, there's something there." I whispered to her, "What did you see?" She replies, "I don't know, but it was a dark figure that floated past the door." I was freaked. We were in the middle of nowhere, no one else was camping there. Our trailer was backed up close to the edge of a drop. If I hadn't gone to pee, I would have peed the bed before I went out of the trailer. The dog growled once more about 20 minutes later, but otherwise, it was dead quiet outside. I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry camping, and even in the dead of winter, I have never experienced this much quiet. It was as if every animal in our vicinity was too frightened to move or make a sound. We still have no idea what it was, and we both still talk about it, 3 summers ago. Just in case you are wondering, we were camped along Duncan Reservoir in the central Kootenay region of BC. Canada. Scary shit. My unexplained camping story from the Ozarks in Arkansas. Back in around 2023 I was camping around the Crow's Hole, I think along the Buffalo River. At the campground there's no service, and I was 16 at the time. I wanted to text my friends, so I walked probably half a mile up the road until I got service at this tree that had a right angle bend in it and a small clearing behind me, which I thought was pretty and unique. I sat there until sundown texting friends, my brain rotting, etc. It got dark, and all of a sudden, the bugs went dead quiet. I know that's not a good sign growing up in the woods, so I went quiet, muting my phone. And I heard what I thought was a person circling behind me, so I used my phone flashlight, which was pretty shitty, to illuminate the clearing behind me. But whatever was back there was just out of the light from my phone. I had heard that the park rangers were rude, so I called out to see if anyone was there. The footsteps stopped, and they were definitely bipedal. Then, about a minute later, I became frightened and ran down the hill to get my mom's ex-boyfriend. I told him what happened, so he asked me to bring him to the spot, and we'd bring the big flashlight. So we go back, and I sit at my bent tree again and text while he stands around impatiently, probably thinking I was a dramatic teenager. About 10 minutes after we started sitting, I heard the steps again and looked at him. His expression indicated that he had heard them too. He used the flashlight, which illuminated about 10 feet past the clearing and extended 20 to 30 feet into the woods. Whatever it was moved just in time out of the light. All we saw was a single bush next to a tree moving suddenly as the light illuminated it. It seemed as if something jumped just out of the light and possibly behind the tree. I saw what I think was a yellow eye illuminated in the light for a second before there was nothing except the sound of something circling the edge of the darkness again. It was heavy. My mom's ex thought it could be a park ranger toy, so he called out, but nothing responded again. I'm not sure if it was the eerie vibe overall or something else, but my mom's ex told me to run suddenly, and I did run. We both ran all the way back to the campsite. I remember hearing something running in the woods alongside us, but that could have been an echo of us running. When we got back, I begged my mom to take me home that night, And apparently the other campers/family friends camping with us also heard something in the woods that night, but of course, it's the Ozark woods, so who knows what animals it could have been. If anyone has any idea or any similar stories, I'd love to hear them. This still freaks me out today, and I refuse to go back to that campsite. A graveyard and a wood. My entire life, my grandfather has lived in a large home in some woods in a town outside Dallas, Texas. We would camp out and explore the area when I was younger, before people decided to start building more in that area. To get to the house, you have to turn off the main road into a cemetery. Not sure why, but the road cuts straight through a pretty large old cemetery. I like to go there on nice days and look around sometimes. It's a good couple-mile walk from my grandfather's house down a road heavily lined with trees. I've seen gravestones with dates as far back as the early 1800s there and always thought it was really neat. So at this point, I'm in between homes and staying with my grandfather. It was approximately 1 a.m., and I was spending time with a colleague, sharing my appreciation for this cemetery. They are interested in going to see the place and want to take some long exposure pictures with a new camera they just got. So we head that way, and I take them to where all the really old graves are. Now, I've always been sensitive to things considered paranormal. I've had a few weird experiences and tend to trust my instincts when I feel something is off. From the time I parked inside the cemetery that night, I knew we probably shouldn't be there, but I ignored my gut feeling because my friend was excited, and I really wanted to show them this cemetery and explore the surrounding woods with them. So we walk along the woodline towards the far back corner, where the oldest graves are, to take some pictures of the headstones and pay respects to the people who have been there the longest. My friend takes a lot of pictures, and I walk around with a flashlight, adding lighting and reading the gravestones. The entire time I'm feeling like I'm being watched. I shake off the feeling and again ignore my instincts because my friend looks like they are wrapping up. They start looking through their images while I make sure we got all our trash and water bottles that we brought with us. The friend calls me over while I'm doing this and asks me to look at one of the photos they just took of some graves in the tree line. I look at the photo and kind of freak out for a second but realize I probably need to stay calm for my friend's sake. I look up to where the photo was taken and see what the camera saw, what my friend doesn't see. In the tree line is a large black humanoid mass with glowing red eyes. I'm not sure how else to describe it, but it looked and felt like rage personified. In all my life, in all the times I've explored the area, I had never seen or felt anything like that night. I asked my friend to slowly start walking back to my car. I'm pretty sure my friends knew something was wrong because I was dead serious and intensely staring at the spot where they had just taken that creepy photo. I'm backing my way to the car and watching the shadow watch us as we leave. We get to a point where I can see the car but not the shadow anymore, so I turn around and start power walking towards my car, keys in hand. I'm still on edge but am feeling better that we are getting out of there. All of a sudden, the shadow appears about 20 feet to my right in the tree line. I tell my friend to run the rest of the way to the car. At this point, we are running and are almost to the car when my friend glances behind us and sees this thing for the first time. They freak out and speed to the car, frantically leaping into the passenger side. I have just got my keys in the ignition when the shadow slams into my friend's door. Its face is right up on the glass. Imagine if you gave a shadow a solid featureless form and then stuck two red LEDs where its eyes should be. That's about what we saw menacing us on the other side of the glass. I get the car started and pull out as fast as I can without hitting any graves and start to drive out of there. I find the official gate even though there are plenty of other closer exits to the road because I've always heard if you enter and leave through the gate of a cemetery, you leave everything you found in the cemetery there and don't bring it with you. I'm telling you now that is bullshit, but that is also a story for later. Anyway, we are leaving the cemetery with this thing keeping up with us off to the right. I finally get to the gate and pull through it, and the shadow stops before leaving the cemetery, right at the gate. We are on a main road headed to my friend's place now, laughing hysterically because the adrenaline is wearing off and we survived something crazy. I get them home, but I have to go back through the cemetery to get home myself. Thankfully I didn't see the shadow again, and I believe it is because that friend wasn't with me. After that night I had a bunch more crazy things happen to me in that area while hanging out with them, so if you guys enjoyed this and want to hear more, just let me know. Tell me what you think of one of the most terrifying nights of my life. If anyone has heard of anything like what I saw that night, I'm all ears. I never found anything on it. Crystal-like twinkling sound. I was out in the woods the other day with my dog and partner in Northern California near this area called Deadwood on the map. We were going to Cherry Lake and decided it was too far, so we ended up going down some random Forest Service roads. We stopped in this clearing where people had camped before just to check it out. Something called us down there. We hear shooting way off in the distance. I'm wandering around the little clearing with my dog, and he starts to point, locked in on the opposite side of the clearing towards the trees. The trees are thick. The feeling in this clearing is thick. I don't see anything. We shush up to listen for more shooting, and then we hear this weird tinkling sound. Like crystal or glass tinkling against each other. Kinda like watery twinkling sounds. It's so hard to describe. My dog got in the car. I got behind my car door and grabbed my gun, lol. I shined my laser into the trees and couldn't see anything. The twinkling stopped when my partner racked his gun. We both heard it, though. It lasted maybe 2 minutes. I walked to the tree line where the sound was coming from and spoke out into the trees. I said hello a few times and listened. Nothing. My partner goes, whatever it was, it's gone, and I could swear I still heard the faintest little twinkling sound. We listened for a few more moments before leaving the area. Was it fairies? Was it aliens? Does anyone have a clue what we heard? Because it was real. None of my hunting friends have an idea. Anyone out there? Noises while hiking up to Mount Lacannie and Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So my grandfather has gone up to Mount Lacannie 50 times now. This past weekend marked his 50th ascent, as he is now 80 years old, which is quite impressive, I must say. Anyway, I had only been invited 2 times before, and this was my third. I'm not as into hiking as he is, and I only went because my 14-year-old cousin asked me to. The times I had gone before were his age and about 8 years old the first time. So I felt it necessary that I go with him. We got up to the hotel we were staying at on Friday night and planned to hike up to the summit and stay at the lodge Saturday night and hike down Sunday morning so I could be back in GA for work Monday morning. We started at the trailhead, the 7-mile one, at about 7:30 a.m. I'm a pretty fit guy, the gym every day and running type of fit. So naturally I get ahead of the group pretty quickly, as I like to run for some exercise, especially with a weighted pack. I came across a sign and a fork in the trail, and I remembered my granddad telling me about a trail that led to a cliff overlooking the forest. I had some time to wait for the group to catch up, so I decided to head out to the overlook. It said it was only 1.3 or 1.7 miles from the main trail, so I didn't think it could hurt that much. On that morning, we had forecasts of light showers in the late morning and early afternoon. So if you're familiar with the GSM, then you know how it looked that morning. It's dark gray, very foggy, and has low visibility, almost like you're inside of a dense cloud while being in a dark forest. They don't call them the Great Smokies for no reason. Anyway, I started to head down this trail. About 15 minutes down the trail I get to the cliff/overlook, whatever you want to call it, and as I figured, I couldn't see shit. Kind of felt like a waste of time, but then again, I was the only one out there for what I knew, 1.5 miles, so it was a pretty surreal and isolated feeling. I enjoyed it and disliked it at the same time. I decided that I'd eat some of my sandwich that I had brought up to eat for lunch. I found a good log to sit on that had a view of the forest, so my back was to the cliff. I had just finished eating the first half of my sandwich when I heard a very faint knock. It sounded almost like a tree branch breaking or something hitting the side of a tree very hard. But it was so faint that I shrugged it off and paid no mind to it. I finished my sandwich and was getting my poncho out of my bag because the rain had started to come. Ponchos are almost like shower curtain material, so when you're shuffling around with them, they're loud next to your head, so what you hear in the distance might not be what you think. But I was taking out the poncho and thought I heard 2 more knocks a little past the tree line to my right. I stopped fidgeting with the poncho so I could hear properly. Felt like another 45 seconds went by, so I continued to get my poncho unfolded and put it on. I started walking towards the trail that would take me back to the main one when I knew, clear as day, that I heard quite a loud knock in the woods to my right. I froze and listened as hard as I could for leaves crunching or anything, but I didn't. I kept hearing what sounded like a large branch or stick being smacked against a rock or a tree. It probably knocked another 4 times before I reminded myself that it was time to return to my group, especially since I already disliked the Appalachian Mountains. I'm walking back down the trail and keep feeling like I am being watched or like someone or something is following me or, even worse, hunting me. I didn't have a gun with me, as my granddad had convinced me that the bears were not an issue on the trail, as it's frequented by people every day, usually by lots of people. So I felt very vulnerable and not alone. I didn't want to stop walking and listen because I was afraid that something might jump out at me. I swear I had been walking for at least 1 mile, so I knew I had to be close to the main trail. But I swear I was hearing slow, heavy footsteps behind me. I kept looking over my shoulder for another hiker or something behind me, but I saw absolutely nothing, and it literally sounded like it was 10 to 15 feet behind me. I was extremely creeped out, so I started to hurry back and eventually made it to the main trail without any incidents. The crazy thing is I wouldn't even call that the weirdest part. As I got back to the intersection, I figured I'd wait for my group to catch back up. I thought about walking down the trail some to see if I could meet them since it was taking longer than I'd thought. Additionally, I want to note that as soon as I left the trail for the main one, it felt like I had entered another world. It was as if the lights had turned on, but when I looked back, the trail I had just been on appeared very dense, dark, and foggy. However, while I was on the main trail, the weather had changed to sunny and misty. It felt as if hours had passed without my awareness. I finally decided to continue up the mountain so I could reach the top and check in, ensuring that when my group arrived, their cabins would be ready for them to walk right into. About 2.5 to 3 hours later, after hiking, I finally reached the summit. But my group was already there, which was really weird to me because I thought I had gone pretty far ahead of them as I was even running at one point. I walked down to them and asked them how they got ahead of me. They responded by asking me where the hell I had been. I told them I had taken the trail my grandfather had told me about, but that's it. I explained that I had gone down to the end of the trail, eaten my sandwich, thrown on my poncho, and then come back. They had told me they stopped for lunch at the split in the trail just in case I had gone down the trail and waited for me to link back up. But they said they waited for what felt like over an hour and assumed that I had continued on to the top. They also mentioned that they had been at the top for an additional 2 hours waiting for me and were about to seek help. This totally freaked me out, as I know for sure how long I was gone, and it was absolutely not hours. More like 45 minutes max. I don't know how to explain this, and they all think I was lying about exploring multiple trail splits. I'm not sure why they would think that, as I am not an avid hiker who would take such risks. I really need some of you guys to tell me what the hell was going on with me up there. I've researched knocking and missing time, but most results link missing time to aliens, which is confusing to me. Can't be aliens, are we? For real? There has to be some sort of explanation here, right? Please help me out. I wouldn't say my encounter was creepy per se, as I don't find woods/forest to be creepy at all, even at night. But an old friend of mine, I'll call her E, whose parents used to own a cabin in the northern part of my state, invited me to her family's summer cabin getaway for a month in high school. It was a fun time, and quite a lot of really strange things happened, from possible UFO sightings to ghost and forest spirit sightings, a possible Bigfoot sighting/encounter and a really odd encounter with a strange person in the forest/woods. But the one I'll talk about will be what I believe to be a forest spirit/protector. E and I one day got bored and went out into the forest to explore, and after around an hour or so of hiking/walking through the woods, we came upon a small little clearing. It was a trash camp, as some people who had camped there at some point had just left piles of trash and broken shit all over it. Holes and piles of dirt littered the forest floor of that clearing, and dirty clothes were thrown about. It wasn't the trash that we noticed first, but rather the figure we saw trying to tend to the area. It was a tall woman, tan but completely naked outside of what were essentially vine/leaf-like wraps around her wrists and ankles and dangling from her neck. Her hair was long, like past her butt. E and I just quietly watched her, as we didn't want to startle her, and we were both just being cautious, just in case. The thing that weirded us both out was that when she picked up pieces of trash or items that were littering the area, she would hold them up to her face and flick her wrist, and as the items/trash flew from her hand, they would disappear shortly after, vanishing in plain air. After a few minutes of watching her, we decided we would just leave her be, so we turned to walk away, and as we did, I stepped on a branch, and it made a snapping sound, and we looked back to see if we had been caught. And we were, but it was what happened next that sent us running back. We looked back at the clearing and saw the lady standing and facing our direction. Her eyes were wide and looked. I'd how to describe them, but they weren't like normal eyes and also seemed to have a glow to them, but before we could even react, she had booked it and run straight into a tree and just vanished, as if, like a ghost, she went through the tree and just vanished, or as if she became one with the tree. It wasn't a creepy encounter at all and didn't freak us out, but just seeing trash vanish and a person vanish before our eyes, we ran back to the cabin out of shock and weren't sure if danger could come to us. So I'm an avid hunter, and every year in my early 20s, I would spend every weekend in the woods of a national park near Oklahoma, close to the Red River. I would normally trek in about 2 to 3 miles. My first encounter was about 10 years ago. I had set up along a clearing and was a good 20 feet up in a tree. As dawn was approaching, I had a large 12-point buck slowly coming into the clearing about 300 to 400 yards off. I let it come closer and took aim and shot it in the kill zone with a .30-06 195 grain ballistic tipped round. After watching it fall through my scope, I slung my gun and was getting ready to climb down out of my tree stand. I watched this deer get up and run back into the woods on 2 legs. I had no idea what the duck happened but had heard stories of skinwalkers in my youth from my grandmother, who's half Native American. So, I quickly left the area after that. A few years later I was in the same area hunting. I had set up my stand and ladder the previous day and around midnight hiked out to my stand so I could be ready for dawn. I got into my stance around 2 a.m. and was waiting patiently. After a couple of hours, around 6 a.m., 30 minutes till sunup, I heard something grab a hold of my ladder. Then it sounded like something was climbing my ladder, but it sounded like claws on metal. I pointed my rifle straight down and fired. I hit something on my first shot and heard a scream, so I naturally emptied the rifle, still pointing straight down my ladder. I didn't dare look down for fear of what I had heard in stories of locking eyes with these beasts. I pulled out my .357 mag revolver and proceeded to empty the cylinder towards the sound of movement I heard. Once that was spent, I reloaded it and continued the barrage. There was still something out there, and I could hear it. I had one gun with ammo left and pulled out my 9mm that I kept with me for self-defense, just in case. I fired a few rounds towards the noise I heard. Then I waited till morning, a few rounds left in my 9mm and clutching it for dear life. When morning came, I looked at my surroundings and climbed out of my tree. Around my tree stand was a dark blackish blood, and it smelled horrible. I can only describe it as a smell worse than death, and it went off deeper into the woods. I hiked to the trail as fast as I could, and when I got there, I saw someone else in the distance. He was going the same direction I was, and he also looked scared. I reloaded everything while he was closing the distance, and once he got closer, I asked him if he was heading out too. He told me he heard a lot of gunshots earlier and a scream. I asked him where he was posted up, and he pointed in the direction that I saw the blood trail go. He said he heard something run by him after the gunshot stopped, and when dawn hit, he saw something animistic running around on two legs. I got his name, we will call him Jim, and he told me we should get out of the woods. He was a native to the area and half Cherokee and told me if what he saw was what he thought, we needed to leave. We got out of the woods. Surprisingly, we both parked in the same area. We shared a beer, and around noon we summoned up the courage to go back for our things. After a slow hike, we went to my stand first. My steel ladder that was secured by ratchet straps and bungees to the tree was ripped from the tree. It was bent and torn up. My tree stand is still in that tree to this day, I assume. He looked at the blood trail and went white. The tracks were a mix of human and canine. We made it to his tree stand after a bit. He was only 800 feet from where I was, surprisingly. His gear was strewn across the forest floor like mine, a bent ladder, but unlike my tree stand. His had been ripped off the tree and thrown. We both left the area and went back to our vehicles. So after that last encounter, Jim and I traded phone numbers and hung out when I went up there to hunt. It kinda became a thing to go hunting together. He knew the woods there better than I did, and he was good company. About 2 years after the incident that caused us to meet, we were posted up in a blind in a clearing. We generally put our stands close or hunted back to back in a blind over the 2 years we hunted together. If one of us had a shot when we were in the blind, we would signal the other with a tap in the back from our elbow. That morning both of us had a shot, we both fired. I hit the doe I was aiming at square in the chest. As it went down, it turned and ran on its back legs, dead sprinting into the woods. Jim's quarry did the same after he hit it. We went to investigate, and once the animals turned, the hoof prints got larger and then changed to human tracks. There was no blood around the tracks, and the area smelled of rotten meat. Jim said we should leave, and I wasn't going to disagree with him. We both stopped hunting in those woods after that encounter. Of note, I carried as much firepower as I did because of my encounters with the locals multiple times. Campsites torn up, food stolen, and being followed into the woods for a mile or two. I carried the revolver for putting an animal out of its misery. I carried the 9mm in case I needed to deal with a person and needed more than 5 shots. I have no clue to this day of what the duck I encountered in those woods. I had heard of skinwalkers before, but from the tales, they are more durable. I used a .30-06 with 195 grain ballistic tipped rounds every time I went hunting. But those are my stories. I hope you all enjoyed them, and maybe someone has some thoughts on what the duck happened in those woods. I found phantom deer prints in the snow. By early 2018, my family had bought a cottage in the rural Irish Midlands. A few weeks after moving, the country was suddenly hit by a very heavy snowstorm, which had closed off all the country roads leading in and out of the village. The village we lived in just happened to be directly next to the Bog of Allen, the largest area of raised bogland in the country. With no school for a couple of weeks due to the snowstorm and still being new to the area, I took the chance to go exploring this bogland with my dog. After reaching the bog through the heavy snow, my dog and I followed along a trail path, which led us to an artificial forest. Continuing along this trail through the forest, I then came upon a line of hoof prints in the snow. The prints clearly belonged to a deer and, judging by the size, were most likely a yearling. But what was strange about the hoof prints was that they seemed to start directly in the middle of the trail, where further along it, they then stopped. The hoof prints didn't start from within the forest, come onto the trail, and then go back into the trees. It was as though the deer that made them appeared on the trail out of thin air and then just vanished. Following these hoof prints to where they ended on the trail, there was no indication in the snow of the deer leaping into the trees, which could have explained why the prints ended so abruptly. Every print in the snow was more or less identical to the others. There were no lines, marks, or anything to imply the deer leapt. I even went into the trees to see if I could find more deer prints to rationalize this leap theory, but by my best efforts, I couldn't. I can also rule out the theory of snow drifts partially covering up the prints, as I don't remember seeing any while on the trail. One theory I did have at the time, however, was that the continual snowfall had covered up parts of the deer prints, but there was no indication of that either. The prints clearly started and ended on the trail. 8 years later and I still don't know what to make of these deer prints. Although I do believe certain things relating to the paranormal, I do think there is still a rational explanation behind what I've come to call the phantom deer prints. I've heard of not a deer stories before and even deer stories relating to skinwalkers. But is there such a thing as phantom deer prints? I honestly have no idea. I'm not trying to convince anyone that I really saw phantom deer prints in the snow, because I already know I saw them. But if anyone has any rational explanations that I may have missed, or even if you want to suggest a paranormal one, I'd really like to hear them. A stranger followed us and hid behind a tree during the camping trip. In July 2025, my group of friends and I went on a camping trip together at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. In total there were 7 of us, being my friends Joe, Danny, Mitch, Nate, and Mac, all aged 18 to 20, and Mac's dad, Ben, in his mid-50s. It was the last night of our trip. Around 12:15 a.m., I was half asleep in my tent while Mac and Ben waited at the campsite for my other friends to return from the bathroom so they could take one more person with them to dispose of our full trash bag up the road. The bathroom was just across the road from our site, visible from all our tents, and took about 30 to 45 seconds to walk to, so it was very close. My friends Joe, Danny, Mitch, and Nate were in the bathroom brushing their teeth, getting ready for bed and stuff. They might have been fooling around a bit maybe, but nothing too crazy. Apparently, my friend Nate unplugged my friend Danny's phone, and my friend Danny was kind of jokingly yelling at him, nothing too loud or crazy, but definitely some obscene name calling and yelling. Suddenly, a man who looked to be in his mid to late 30s or 40s comes and walks into the bathroom. My friend Mitch was partially blocking the man's path, so when he realized this, he moved aside and said, "Oops, sorry," but the man responded ominously without saying anything. He went to the urinal and went to pee and then flushed, washed his hands, and walked out saying nothing. Nobody really thought much of it, except that the guy looked kind of dead inside. My friend said he had a kind of 1,000-yard stare in his eyes, which was definitely a bit creepy, but nothing too weird, I guess, especially since it was late anyway. The bathroom had a row of windows at the very top of the walls that were too high to see through, but they were open, allowing sounds from immediately outside the bathrooms to be heard. All of a sudden, after he left, my friends heard footsteps pacing back and forth on the gravel outside the bathroom from the windows. My friends said they stopped dead and just listened, totally freaked out, thinking maybe it would be that guy, because to continue back on the road to return to a campsite, you wouldn't have any reason to be on the side of the building like that. Then, the same guy returned to the bathroom again and went back to the same urinal, like he was pretending to use it but wasn't actually doing so. At that, my friends were super creeped out and, together, decided to get the hell out of there and go back to the campsite. As they were walking out, they thought they heard something behind them. They got to the campsite to reunite with Mac and Ben and very quickly told them what happened in the bathroom. That's when they turned around and shone their flashlights back out in that direction, and I could hear Nate suddenly say, "Look, there he is behind that tree." To their absolute horror, they saw that the same man from the bathroom had followed them back to their campsite, with their flashlights illuminating half of his body still sticking out from behind the tree. When he noticed the lights shining on him, it seemed like he tried to walk away and play it off, but when he realized he was in too deep and had definitely been spotted, he stopped and said, "Put the light down, little boy, and go to bed." That's when Ben, Mac's dad, said, "Stop following my boys." That's when the man replied, "I was going for a walk when I heard them hooting and hollering in the bathroom, being super loud this late at night." Ben then said something calling him out for what he believed was a BS lie, saying something like "Yeah right, totally," because he didn't believe the man's story at all. Then the man turned around and left, walking off completely into the dark without turning on a flashlight or anything at all. While I was in my tent, I only heard the conversation when my friends shone their flashlights at him, but I had a unique experience. My intuition suggested that he actually veered off the small road and cut across the open field next to our campsite, which does not lead to other campsites but instead goes to a pond. It was similar to the feeling you get when you can physically sense that someone is looking at you. From the mattress in my tent, it felt as though someone had passed by behind us and cut through the open field instead of continuing on the road, as one would typically do when returning to their campsite. We were definitely pretty spooked and called the ranger, but nobody picked up. Then we called the cops, and they took a bit to get there. An officer finally got there, and we told them what happened. He said this happens more often than we might expect, and while he isn't claiming this is exactly what happened, he said there are times when homeless people come by, get into people's sites and take some supplies and things. They searched the area but didn't find anything. We ended up just packing up and leaving that night. The next day we called the campground people and reported everything, giving as full and accurate a description of the guy as possible. They let us know that, to their knowledge, there was no camper presently there who matched the description. To this day, we have no idea who this guy was, why he was following us, or what his intentions were, especially if it was just us kids that hadn't noticed he followed us back. My friends and I, to this day, talk about how creepy it was and try to come up with what was going on in this guy's head. We would love to hear what other people might have to say if they ever experienced something similar, especially in that area, or if people really think something more sinister could have potentially occurred and we dodged a bullet by noticing him hiding behind the tree. I need to know what people think this thing was. My friend and I were driving in the woods, listening to music at night, and we noticed a car on the side of the road. It wasn't on, but there was something on the driver's side. At first it looked like a white headrest cover or something like that. My friend who was driving suddenly speeded up away from the car, terrified. He said it looked like a face under a white cloth and he could see some facial features underneath it. Soon we laughed it off, thinking maybe he was just imagining things. After a little while we decided to turn back to take a better look at it. It was still there. Now I could see the face too, but not as well. My friend again speeded up and was even more terrified. He now definitely saw a face. There wasn't just a cloth on top of the face, it was wrapped around the head tightly. He could see the face had its mouth fully open under the fabric. We drove off and tried to come up with an explanation, but it still creeps us out. My first thought was that it was someone having a migraine trying to relieve it, but it seems odd to wrap your whole head up. I really don't know. Any thoughts would be appreciated. Odd fox/dog sighting while walking to work. I am not sure if it was an actual animal or some sort of spirit, but it was definitely strange. I'll start off by explaining the situation. I had to leave for work at 5:30, and since it takes about an hour to walk, the car is in poor condition. I set off at around 4:30. The walk up is about half a mile between a housing estate and a forest, then a full mile along a main road that's connected to a half-wooded, half-clearing area on the left and an old-growth forest on the right over the main road. The walk includes a 350 feet incline with no flat areas, and since it was -3 degrees Celsius, I allowed myself the full hour to reach my destination, even though it typically takes around 50 minutes. Given that it was a less than pleasant area to walk through during the day, I felt a bit uneasy at first. Combined with it being incredibly foggy to the point I could only just about see 20 feet in front of me clearly, I was jittery, to say the least. As I walked up to the main road, I noticed that the sound of the river was much louder than usual. From the edge of the housing estate, it's about a 10-minute walk into the woods to where you can typically start to hear the river, which I initially attributed to the significant rain the day before. However, upon reflection, I realized that in the nearly 20 years I've lived in the area, I've never been able to hear it from the path. The sound also kind of followed me even as I got further away from the woods. Once I got to the main road, I did calm down a bit. Once I started seeing cars driving up and down, I could hear some very odd bird calls. They sounded vaguely like a common loon, except I don't even live close to America, which did freak me out a good bit. I had never heard anything similar in my entire life. I live next to a forest and work in conservation. So even though I am absolutely useless at identifying animal sounds, I have heard literally everything at least once before, making it unnerving not to know what it was. Despite being a grown man, I was admittedly feeling a bit ill at this point because I had that awful sensation of being watched or followed, which I had only experienced before when someone was actually following me. As a result, I was preparing to sprint the last half mile, even though my legs were already burning from how fast I had been walking up the steepest part of the trail. At this point, I assumed that the source of the noises was someone under the influence of drugs, as it is not uncommon for people to be followed or attacked on the very quiet roads at night, and that seemed to be the best explanation for the strange sounds I was hearing. I continued moving forward, checking behind me almost obsessively and listening for any unusual sounds from the wooded area to my left. Then, quite suddenly, a fox-like dog wandered onto the path in front of me, positioned halfway into the road, before turning around and returning to the woods without stopping or looking at me. For one, I nearly had a heart attack just as is because of how on edge I was, and two, the way it moved was just really odd. There was no slowing down to creep back through the gaps in the fence, no stop to turn around, and it made zero noise coming in and out of the woods. It also didn't even look at me once. My thoughts at the time were either that there was a gap in the fence that I didn't know about or that it was a feral dog and that I was in some big trouble since I've never seen a fox just not care about someone walking towards it, but I have seen stray dogs act off, and it's never a good start. I get to the point where I saw it come out from, and the fence was completely normal. Even a smaller fox would probably take a little bit of time to slip through, but what I saw was maybe between the size of a Labrador and a German Shepherd, so there was no chance at all to just be able to slip in and out without stopping and definitely not without making noise. At that point the idea of it being something supernatural did start to creep into my mind, and very little good ever comes from black dogs at night in the fog. I think that was quite literally the first time in my life I was that afraid just walking alone, more scared than I had been with people straight up following me, because I just had zero explanation for what had just happened. I was filled with pure adrenaline-fueled fear to the point of tearing up a little, which was disturbing because I am not easily scared at all. I do not believe I have ever felt more relieved to arrive at work in my life. When I checked my watch, I'd done what is at best a 50-minute walk in just over 30, which probably explains why my legs were burning all day at work and are still sore now, 2 days later. Despite how I've worded everything, I didn't get a particularly malicious sort of vibe from whatever it was, but something was definitely freaking me out way more than just being a bit nervous about a dark road. UK folklore is either it's a demon out to kill you or it's guiding you on the right path / warding off evil spirits. Considering all went well despite it being a generally rough area, I'm hoping it was the second one. I am aware that my late grandmother on my mother's side was exceptionally spiritual, and my sister shares this trait as well. Consequently, I have some familiarity with such matters, and my sister insists that I carry small iron and silver pendants on my keyring. However, this is certainly not the first time I have encountered inexplicable phenomena on the outskirts of the town. Most of them were objectively more scary, but I'd never felt that scared before. I definitely understand why I saw so many taxis passing by, traveling from my part of town to the main area, even though they cost a ridiculous amount that early in the morning. Whether supernatural or not, I do not like that road when it's dark. I decided to take a walk. Today I decided to take a walk in the forest. No one wanted to come with me, so I went alone. I took some fruits and tea with me, and with music in my ears, I started my route. On a picnic table I wanted to eat something. I turned around, and there was a woman with a small dog, which I didn't hear because of my music. I did put my backpack on the bench and looked at the woman again, and she wasn't there. I searched for her for a short moment because I thought she was behind a tree or turned around and left. But there was no possibility that she could have gone because I've seen all the ways someone could have gone. Some people came after that, and I've still seen them about 5 minutes after. The lady didn't wear a white dress or something creepy, only a jacket and jeans like every woman in her 40s or 50s would wear. I think something followed me home. I've visited Forest Haven, in Maryland, many times and never saw anything of note until the last time I went, around 10 months ago in March. I was in one of the back buildings walking down this long hallway with cells or what could have been padded rooms at some point. I had turned around at the end of the hallway and saw at the halfway point a shadowy apparition of sorts peek at me from one of the rooms. Whatever I saw felt sad, and looking back on it, I feel as if it resembled a child's spirit. I know no one was in any of the rooms because I had checked all of them in case there were squatters, and I had repeatedly looked back while walking down the hallway. I get goosebumps and a swell in my throat when I talk about it to this day. Whatever it was scared the absolute duck out of me to the point that when I saw it, I made an almost gasping / yelping noise and totally freaked out my girlfriend and her friend, and I wouldn't say what I saw until we stepped outside. I described what I had witnessed once we finally stepped outside, and they expressed a desire to return, which I reluctantly consented to. However, as we approached the entrance, I heard footsteps inside and exclaimed, "Forget that," ultimately deciding it was time to depart. There have been strange occurrences at my house in the past, but nothing that left me speechless until after that experience. One of the first strange occurrences, which has only happened once or twice, is hearing voices. Both my girlfriend and I have entered the house on separate occasions and heard the sound of voices. From my experience, I had walked in the front door and heard two adult male and female voices having a conversation, and as soon as I registered it, it was gone. I checked the whole house, and there was nothing. My girlfriend, however, was downstairs changing and heard a male voice speaking upstairs. She assumed it was my dad and asked me where he went when I got home an hour later, and I told her he had been at work the entire time. She never heard anyone enter or leave the house. Secondly, there was the little boy. This one is iffy with me because only my girlfriend saw him, and she claimed she had just woken up. In the morning, my girlfriend was lying in my bed when she rolled over and briefly saw a little boy or something of similar size in the doorway, which then vanished. I attributed it to being a half-asleep vision, similar to ones I've experienced before. The third experience was me and my girlfriend downstairs, where we usually reside, and it was very late at night. My dad's bedroom is directly above where we sit on the couch and watch TV. We were watching TV and kept hearing movement, so I paused the TV to listen and heard what sounded like furniture moving in my dad's room. He was dead asleep and had to be up at 5 a.m. for work, and what sounded like lighter footsteps going from the hallway to my brother's room. They were not home. I never asked my dad about this because I didn't want to sound crazy, but I know it was someone else. Lastly, I am writing this because I believe the activity may be becoming more aggressive or simply more frequent. I had left for work around 4 a.m., and my girlfriend woke up to a plethora of noises 45 minutes after I had left. Something walking down the stairs, things on my shelf moving, something in the basement apparently sounding like a person moving clothes or changing, and then a very loud bang on the wall directly next to the bed. She described it to be as if someone ran full speed through my door and smacked into the wall next to her. None of the other stuff is super threatening, but that loud bang felt aggressive. We've been trying to ignore it because it only gets worse when I acknowledge it or we talk about it. I actually want to know what it is and if it's safe and if it's multiple things, on account of seeing a little boy but hearing an adult male and female conversing multiple times. Can anyone give me suggestions on how to identify this thing safely without causing more issues? Some weird feeling in the woods. This just happened a few hours ago, and it's making me feel really weird and scared, so I'll get right to it. I'm a police officer in a very rural area in northern Canada, with 2,000 something people plus 5 to 6 reserves and settlements nearby. Very early in the morning we responded to a call. This guy is threatening to hurt a victim over stupid stuff. So we attended the call, which was in a heavily forested settlement. The area was pitch black all around, with muddy roads and other challenging conditions. We find the location, speak with the victim, and create a plan in which two of us will stay back for security while the others go to locate and arrest the suspect. I end up staying back with my partner. He stays out by the road a good 100 or more yards away from the house. I can see his lights, he can see mine. Radio reception is poor, but that is typical for the area. I do my usual police stuff, speak to the victim and family inside, get info details, etc., but I end up walking out of the house and get this awful feeling of what I can only describe as dread. I feel an awful sensation, as if someone or something in the woods is watching me. I get back to my truck, hop in, lock the door, and start playing with the lights all over, top, front, sides, etc. I turn the front one on, and it lights up the dark tree area with no problem. I turn my eyes to my left and turn on my left side alley light, and I get the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. I don't see anything at all, just dark spots behind trees due to shadows. That's normal, but I feel like I'm looking at something I shouldn't be looking at. My eyes start feeling like they're vibrating, and I start getting dizzy. I just feel like it was pure terror for me in that moment. That feeling and pressure. So I quickly look away. As soon as I do, my eyes go back to normal. I look around in every direction except where I just looked, and everything seems normal. However, as soon as I glance back that way, the unsettling feeling returns, as if something is telling me, or even forcing me, to stop. I looked back a couple of times to see if I somehow just turned my head weird, but no, it's all happening when I look in that area. I drove to where my partner was, the only entrance to the house, and sat and talked to him about stuff. I don't tell him because I don't think he would believe me. His car is beside the tree line, and while talking to him car to car, I get the urge to look up at the trees, and that awful feeling comes back again. So I look away. I end up going back to the house without looking at the forest where I felt that feeling. Talk to the victim about additional information, start walking back, and hear a noise to my left, a different part of the forest closer to the house. I turn my flashlight on and nothing is there on the ground level. I look up higher into the trees, and that awful feeling returns, filling me with fear and dread, causing me to stumble and fall slightly as if I were being pushed down or my legs were giving way. The victim saw me and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and just speed walked to my car. We received the all clear, and as we started to leave and drive down the driveway, I felt a death stare directed at me the entire time I passed the patch of trees, as if I had angered something. I have absolutely no idea what that was, what was going on, or anything. That was not me being tired, that was not me being exhausted or sick or any of that. I was fully awake, aware, and not particularly stressed. Can anyone help describe what that could have been? Those woods are haunted. Those woods here are haunted. She looked me fiercely in the eye, pointing to them. They took my husband. An older woman, who was gray and frail, appeared strangely lucid. I believed her. But I didn't think too much of it. I didn't really intend to venture into that area. I heard cougars and bears were present in droves along the outskirts of town. When I first moved here, that older woman I met at a coffee shop told me not to go near one particular spot, a thicket of woods that lay along the edge of town just a few kilometers north of my house. They're haunted, she said. They took my husband. I never really took spooky stories seriously but remembered this one. And I never assumed that the woman was crazy. I remembered this one each time I passed those same woods on my way to work and back home. The first night traveling the highway beside those woods was when it happened. The sun had set before my shift was over, and the parking lot where I left my car was bleak under the cool, night sky. The road back home was barely visible. About halfway home, I saw the beam of a vehicle's emergency lights. The light is on inside the cab, and the driver's side door is open. The car was barely on the side of the road. The brightness and urgency of the flashing lights motivated me to pull over and see if I could be of any help. Worrying there was someone slumped inside I couldn't see with a medical emergency, I activated my own emergency lights. I turned my cab light on to find my flashlight, somewhere under the passenger seat. I then jumped out of my car and left my door open. I ran to the car only to find it empty. I circled it without seeing anyone lying beside it, unconscious. Nothing. I yelled out, "Hello? Is everyone all right?" No answer. I walked around the car and looked under it with my flashlight. The empty vehicle was an oddly vintage station wagon, unusually well kept. As if it were new. The license plate was from the same province but looked antique. Beige or something, with wood paneling on the side. Like the old wagons did. I looked to the tree line along the side of the road where they'd parked, shining the light in and calling out a few more times. All I could see was darkness. I then realized I was on the edge of the apparently haunted forest that the woman had warned me about. That part didn't really worry me too much, as I was more concerned with an injured person or persons associated with the abandoned wagon. Not knowing what else to do, I hopped back in my car and called the non-emergency line. Waiting for an answer, I wrote down the license plate on a piece of notepaper I found in the glove compartment with a pen. The non-emergency line only allowed me to leave a message, which I did, noting the plate number, description, flashing lights, interior light on, door wide open, beige with wood paneling on the side. Driving home, I felt uneasy about it all. Just as I walked in the door, the phone rang. It was the police. "Hello, this is Andy," I answered. "Did you make that report, sir?" they asked. I made the report, "Yeah. I'm not sure if someone there is in trouble or what the situation is," I answered. "Sir, we've been getting reports of a car pulled over in that spot with that description for over 40 years. Same plates, the whole deal. We are aware that some of these reports are false claims." I froze, not sure what to make of what I had just been told. This isn't a false claim at all, I'm just worried about someone being out there hurt. What would I make a false claim like this for? "Fine, sir. In the future, please never get out of your car for any vehicle parked along the highway." The officer then hung up. That was a little rude, I thought out loud. I went to bed later on without much more thought of it. A few months later, a coworker and I found out we lived in the same neighborhood and began carpooling to and from work. One morning as we passed the woods where I'd seen the old wagon parked with its emergency lights blaring, it occurred to me to ask him if he knew anything about it or any false claims of an abandoned wagon on the side along the stretch we were on. "That's an old fake story," he said. "After Mrs. Engel's husband ended himself out here. Just got up, drove out here, walked into the forest there and offed himself." I felt a chill down my back. The police kept receiving calls about a station wagon parked on the side, with its emergency lights on and the driver's door open, in the same location where his truck was found, emergency lights on, interior light illuminated, and the door open. But it turns out that all the calls were coming from their house, where his wife lived alone after he died. She was calling it, I guess. She went crazy after he died. That night, the sun set early, and the drive home was dark. I rode passenger. I kept looking to the side, where I thought the edge of that haunted forest was. I anticipated the flashing lights of the old wagon, which had its door projecting into the right lane. The one I'd seen that night. The one Mrs. Engel apparently reported regularly to the police. With the same plates I'd seen and all. Same color and wood paneling. Before they found out, it was always her reporting the same thing. "Mr. Engel, you know that guy?" my coworker asked as we drove in the darkness. Breaking the silence. "He just went nuts or something." His wife said he didn't seem depressed or show any mental health symptoms or anything after they found him. No reason for it. That she knew of anyway. I nodded. "Yeah, weird," I responded, growing anxious, remembering what I'd seen the night I pulled over. Police found his truck that way. It looked like he had stopped to help someone. The emergency lights were on and the door was wide open. He had a big old truck or something. They found him hanging about 5 kilometers into the woods. Ended himself, I guess. I don't really know. It was a super long time ago. I remember the night I stopped. I stopped to help someone, or at least what I thought was someone in need. My emergencies are on. The driver's side door was wide open, and the interior light was on in my car, just like the one I'd stopped to investigate. Mr. Engel's truck was found that way. Blaring emergency lights, driver's door open, interior on. It took them a few days to find his body after that, my coworker said. They found his truck and thought maybe he got a ride or something. It looked like an emergency. He left his door open, put his lights on and so on. Left the interior on. It must not have been long since he walked into the woods. Battery would have died. He kept his eyes on the road as he went on. After a few days, they had to put a search out. He never came back. I remember walking back to my car the night I stopped. My emergencies are flashing, the interior is on. The door is open. Terror washed over me as I sat listening during the drive home. Mrs. Engel doesn't think her husband ended himself. My coworker kept breaking the silence with more unnerving little details about the Engel story. "I think she's right," he said. "It just doesn't make any sense why he'd leave the lights and stuff flashing if he wanted to. Like die. Or whatever. She thought he'd stopped for someone on the side of the road or something. No foul play. They found his footsteps and stuff. They investigated. There was no sign of anyone else. Creepy, though. Every time I think of it I remember something else about it. Pretty scary. Maybe the Engel lady thinks it's someone with a wagon. They didn't find any car like that with those plates, though." As we pulled in, all I could think to say was, "Yeah, man, that's messed up." I never told him I'd seen a wagon pulled over there myself. The wagon matching Mrs. Engel's false reports. Same description. Same plates. Same color. Same wood panels. The driver's side door is open, emergencies are on. Mrs. Engel warned me when I first moved here. Those woods are haunted. They took her husband. That's how she knew. "You know what?" my coworker said. "Dave is his name. What I just remembered is that I was driving this morning. As we passed the wood, he told me he seemed to remember that Mr. Engel had once reported a wagon abandoned on the side of the road, a few years before he passed. That was something I do remember because it was the same wagon his wife kept calling in, with the same plates and everything. She must have thought the wagon sighting had something to do with his death since they found his truck there." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had goosebumps on my arms. But I kept looking straight ahead at the road. He said he got out to see if anything was wrong. Nobody was there. The wagon's emergency lights were blaring, the license plate number was visible, the driver's door was open, and the interior light was on, the same description Mrs. Engel had reported so many times after he died. She probably thinks it had something to do with it, but they found nothing. He was 5 kilometers in. He must have got that far by foot. You can't drive anywhere through there. I kept silent and kept my eyes straight on the road. They could take me, I thought. My hands gripped the wheel. "Everything all right?" Dave asked. "Those woods are haunted," I answered. "They'll take me one day." Dave laughed. He thought I was joking.